All right, we're live. Say whatever you want to say, guys.
Hello, YouTube.
Rockstar likes men.
So, what's wrong with that?
Hello.
You're not supposed to know that.
What an intro.
So we're going to be reviewing a video.
Yeah. This was a highly requested video. A lot of the atheists were extremely upset about this video because this made the atheist community look really bad. So, in usual fashion, atheists' greatest defenders are here again to put these theists back in their place.
Yeah, all three of our viewers were heavily requesting this response. So,
I'm joking. I actually love Than. So,
yeah, I no ill will towards Than, even though we'll probably be criticizing some of the stuff he says. Cameron is like really bad at what he does and runs like a terrible YouTube channel, but I'm sure he's a nice guy in real life. I don't know the other guy on here.
Alrighty. Do you want me to start from the very beginning?
Start from wherever you want to.
Okay, good. Do you also want me to put it like 1.25 speed or?
Yeah, sure.
Go through it. Okay. Let's do that. Oh, there we go. Okay. Let's get it.
Knechtle.
No.
And it's interesting because I hadn't heard of him until recently. Like his clips are apparently he took off on TikTok and got way more popular. But
also let me know when to pause. I should have said that.
Anyway, I started hearing about him like a couple of months ago. People were like, hey, why don't you review this by Cliffe? And then I would say the name, but I had no idea how to pronounce it. But yeah, I looked it up for that video because I didn't know how to pronounce it. And I clicked on the PBD podcast where I'm assuming he pronounced it correctly. But turns out a ton of people know who this guy is because he's been doing it forever. Like I heard from people who are like, oh, I knew that guy from like the 1970s when he was on my campus. So he's been doing this since like the 70s and 80s and stuff like that. Going on campuses, having the discussion. So he's one of the OGs. He's one of the OGs of this approach. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, he does come across as more of a preacher, less of a philosopher. And so that's, I mean, a lot of people in the comments, because the way that we've titled this is like this, from my perspective, and I think Than is going to comment on this as well. David, this is your first watch through of the debate itself, actually, and we're going to get some thoughts from you live. But to me, I mean, because I know so much about Alex, I've interacted with him one-on-one, like he's been in my house. Like I know Alex. I'm not like, we're not best friends, but I know what he's aware of. I know the arguments and why he's presenting sort of what he is presenting in different contexts and stuff. And to me, I think he could have presented a much more philosophically robust case. And so to me, there were some pretty embarrassing moments in this debate from my perspective.
I have to say, I find that tough to believe.
It is. Yeah, no, I get that. I get that.
No, I'm saying people brought up the debate a couple days ago when me and AP were live because they wanted us to respond to the first question of the Q&A once they start taking Q&A from the chat. That's the only thing I actually watched because someone asked us to check it out. So I scrolled through and got to the first question and so on. But I said at some point, if I had to predict, if you're talking about like sit down formal debate, I would say Alex would have to have a much better advantage because he's been doing it for a long time. And Cliffe Knechtle, I would say, okay, if they were on a college campus with students yelling stuff, I would go with Cliffe because that's what he does.
So the question is not who won. Okay, so I think in terms of rhetoric and stuff, Alex probably had the upper hand. I think Cliffe, I mean, people were giving him like a really rough time. I mean, he's not a philosopher. Like he's obviously not a philosopher. Okay, you watch this debate, you know that he's like there's a lot of opportunity for him to grow in that area. But I mean, he nevertheless like made some decent points, and there were some points where Alex just had like a really, I think, a bad response in response to Cliffe's like not too challenging of a question, and so that I think is also kind of embarrassing. Given how smart Alex is, and Cliffe even points that out in this debate. Cliffe is like, "Look, Alex, I know you're a smart guy. Like they've interacted before as well. Like everyone knows. If you watch Alex, especially someone like me who's been one-on-one with Alex, like I know how smart the guy is. But the fact that he like couldn't give like good responses, and we are going to cover that. We're going to play a bunch of clips today for you guys, so you can decide for yourself whether or not you think.
I just want to say, I watched the debate, the original debate. I didn't watch all this review, but from what I remember, there was not very many places where Alex didn't give a good response. Most of the questions he was given were pretty easy. most of the responses he was given were pretty bad. But yeah, I mean, we'll see what they point to.
Okay. I also wanted to say before we start this is I think a lot of people should be very careful when they're reviewing debates, and they try not to say someone performed bad because of some things that they could have potentially said or some responses that you have in mind, whether it's for them or the opposition. Like we want to judge the debate on its like own merits. Don't say, oh, he did really bad because there is this objection out there and there's this objection. It's like that's going to be completely tangential to what like the content of what they're saying is in the actual debate. So
in the context of a debate, it's probably more important that you respond to what your opponent is saying than that you anticipate every possible response that could exist to what you're saying, or even every possible response that you've heard before to what you're saying.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So just judge it by what's being said by the interlocutors, not by what the fuck's out there. All right. Anybody else have anything to say?
I would also be careful about our fashion choices. I'll leave it there.
All right.
Embarrassing or not. But I mean, ultimately, like, even if you don't think or agree with me that it was embarrassing on Alex's part, I think it was nevertheless really disappointing. Yes. Really disappointing. And I'll explain, like, there's very little chance that you're going to disagree with that conclusion.
I'll be back really quick.
Now, I think at the end of this.
Preemptively, let me ask preemptively this question. You're pointing out that Cliffe is not a philosopher, and Alex knows he's not a philosopher. So if you're basically saying he's not giving talking about Alex, he's not giving philosophically rigorous responses. How much of that is him?
He's making claims,
sort of not trying to make philosophically rigorous claims because he's.
It's not just that, David. It's not just that. At least in my estimation, I think Alex actually gave some arguments that had philosophical mistakes in them because, and he was able to get away with those mistakes.
Yes.
Smart to know that he made those mistakes in those arguments, right? But he got away with them because he was talking to somebody like Cliffe. That's not to demean Cliffe. It's just like we said, Cliffe is not a philosopher. Yeah. It's disappointing to see somebody like Alex, who knows better, make some of these mistakes. And the specifics we'll point out later, I'm assuming. So I'm not going to go into any examples right now.
So my question is, like, when he makes these mistakes, like, in relation to like the debate, like, did Cliffe actually have substantive responses to some of the things that Alex was saying? Because if not, then that actually makes like Alex look better. So it seems like the very thing that like I was like anticipating, it might come to fruition here. So I just want to throw that out. Yeah.
We'll play the clips and you guys can see it for yourself.
So is it more along the lines, because if you're saying that Alex should or does know better than what, in other words, he's giving an argument or giving a response that he knows is defective, but he's presenting it because he knows he's talking to someone who might not be aware of the problem.
Sorry, I have to pause there. Like, that's just going to be tangential to whether or not like he performed well in the debate, right? Was Cliffe able to respond? Like, if not, then like who cares if like he rendered an argument that he knows might be flawed? Like,
there's also there's multiple hypotheses for why he might present an argument that he's heard responses to before. It's not only that he thinks that he can pull a fast one on this guy that doesn't know a lot of philosophy. It may be that he thinks the responses aren't very good.
Yeah. Exacto.
In which case it would be kind of like the Dawa guys who would back in the day would argue perfect preservation of the Quran, but then once it had been exposed, then they won't try to use it against anyone who knows about the history of the Quran. But when they're talking to someone who knows absolutely nothing about anything, then but did you know the Quran's been perfectly preserved? And they'll use it if they're talking to someone who doesn't know how to respond to it. And
I think unfortunately that is the situation. Unfortunately, and I've got some receipts for this as well, so like we're going to get to that as well. Like, I published a video about 2 years ago outlining like a response to Alex's overall case for atheism, like from the problem of evil. I laid out like a really long 40-minute video responding to it. I laid out 2 different theodicies on animal suffering. Alex didn't mention either of those. He repeated old claims that he's made in the past.
He might have
I take it back. Alex had to have been dishonest because he didn't address the 2-year-old Capturing Christianity video that deals with animal suffering. My bad. I thought I was giving him the benefit of the doubt, but he didn't watch the 2-year-old Capturing Christianity video. So yeah, totally Alex's fault. Now I changed my mind.
Cameron, it might be the case that he brings up the animal suffering thing, and not like whatever responses you had. It's like maybe your responses are just inadequate. Sorry, dog. I don't know.
Or maybe they're not inadequate. Maybe Alex just thought they're inadequate, or maybe Alex has some responses in mind that he would bring up were his debate opponents to raise those objections.
Or maybe your videos didn't give any like impression on Alex, so he just completely forgot. Like it was just not in the noggin at all. I don't know.
Alex has watched that video, so it's just I mean, disappointing is obvious, but I think the fact that he made these claims, to me, it's really embarrassing. Not everyone necessarily is going to agree with me on this, but yeah.
I do want to clarify. I don't think Alex was being intentionally deceitful here either. At least that's not my pickup on it. I don't know what to call it. I don't have access to psychology, so I just do want to clarify that. Like, at least that's not where I'm coming from.
Yeah, you are. You're calling him a charlatan.
I really
liar.
don't. If I thought he was being intentionally deceitful, I'd straight up say it. But
I honestly think that he's just a really smart guy, intelligent guy, and he's good at debate. Like, he knows what is going to work against his debate opponent in this case, and he knows that he can make a claim that he's made in the past, and it's not really going to be challenged that hard. And he knows he's going to get away with it.
I told
so it's a
Michael
really good
this
debate
when I
tactic.
spoke to him. It does seem Cameron thinks he was being dishonest.
Two things. One, there's a question.
Yeah, it just sounds like he said, "Oh, I'm not saying he's being dishonest. I'm just saying that he was he's intentionally not mentioning a response that he knows defeats his argument because he thinks he can pull a fast one on his debate opponents." But I'm not saying he's being dishonest, though. Not saying that.
Yeah,
why would you do that? If it's not germane, why would you like bring that up? I don't understand.
From there's a super chat from Addison Weir, which is, should I watch this stream or IP and God Logic stream? I would say this stream, obviously, because it's got us. But no, I would say it kind of depends on what you're more interested in right now, because they're going to be talking about Islam, and we're going to be talking about atheism and so on. The other issue, little side issue, because you're talking about Alex being a good debater and so on. He also has the added advantage, apart from his intelligence and so on, and his debate experience, also has the added advantage of having the intelligent British accent.
Oh, you're gonna upset all his fans now. People always get mad at me when I bring that up.
Yeah, guys, I don't know what other people in the world hear, but there's a really smart sounding British accent to where there's like Richard Dawkins, Douglas Murray.
Posh.
I think if you're like low IQ, then like the British accent will actually like sway you to think someone's more intelligent than they actually are. But that's just me. Actually, that was kind of harsh. I just realized that was a little harsh.
That was worth pausing the video for.
I think if you just like worry about like the substance of what's being said and not like how it sounds, I think you might find that a lot of British people might not be as intelligent as you think they are.
Sorry, I wasn't listening to you. You didn't sound like you were at a tea party.
The Boston one.
Yeah, Alex here. But you can say anything and you sound more intelligent. So it amplifies whatever you're saying. It makes it sound more intelligent. And that is opposed to, then you have kind of neutral British accents, and then you have British accents that sound real stupid. You got like the yo, because I was going down here that we hear from like the Dawa guys, and then like Cockney, and then whatever Russell Brand is like, oh, the imperialistic dogma in our society is, and it's like you sound like a freaking idiot. Even if you're saying something that is the smartest thing that anyone has ever said, you sound stupid. I guess it's like, I don't think we have a super intelligent sounding American accent. We got dumb sounding American accents. Like if you go like my hillbilly cousin.
What are you talking about? Well, I guess I was going to say Peterson, but he's not American, is he? He's Canadian. So his accent is extremely intelligent.
Peterson does not sound intelligent.
Sounding.
Yeah, I have to say though, it's not nearly as intelligent sounding as the intelligent sounding British accent. I say compared to other accents, compared to other North American.
I'm joking. I don't think his accent sounds intelligent at all.
Well, I mean, compared to my hillbilly cousins, he does.
You have a pretty good Peterson impersonation, don't you? Or is that AP?
AP is actually better. I'm shocked. I did not think of AP as an impression guy, but if he practices for a while,
this
he can
whole
actually get good at
preamble should just be skipped.
True.
What's that?
This whole preamble should just be skipped.
Yeah, Rockstar, you need to find where they actually start talking about.
Just skip it a couple.
Look at when they pull up. Go.
Yes, like 35 minutes in. Perfect, Rockstar. Do that.
We'll go to when they first pull up the video with Alex and the other people. Go to there.
Let me see.
So we're almost there, I think.
Oh yeah, we're almost there.
You see, actually, this one from Alex's side.
Who's this guy with him? Phil who?
Some kind of thought-out response. Phil's already mentioned the problem of animal suffering. It's worth reflecting that the problem of evil has a number of well-thought-out responses called theodicies. Evil exists because of higher-order goods that can only be attainable if there's some kind of suffering in the world. Free will means that we need to be able to commit free evil acts. Evil helps our souls to develop and grow closer to God, this kind of stuff. Please keep in mind that none of them, are effective in explaining the existence of non-human animal suffering. Animals do.
Okay, I'm pausing it there because this is the claim that he makes, right? None of the theodicies that exist right now are effective at explaining non-human suffering.
I don't think he said none of the theodicies. I thought he was just giving. He
Not
gave
effective.
He listed a few and then said none of them, presumably referring back to the ones that he listed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Animal suffering, and again, he knows there are these theodicies exist. Okay, we're gonna. I don't know that we need to necessarily run through them. We can, if we need to, we can kind of explain some of these if you guys want us to. They exist, and Alex needs to acknowledge that. Like he needs to.
Alex didn't say that they don't exist. He just said that they're not. Even assuming that he's not just referring to the ones he listed, that he's just referring to theodicies in general. He didn't say that theodicies which deal with animal suffering don't exist. He just said there aren't any that effectively deal with it. I mean, that just seems to be misrepresenting him to say he's not saying that there are any, period.
Fact that there are theodicies that exist that philosophers have been working on. And a theodicy, if you don't know, we've been using this word a lot. If you don't know what a theodicy is, it's just a reason that God has for allowing the suffering in the world. And this is a particular type of suffering that he's focusing on. He and Phil in this debate are focusing on animal suffering. So they want to say, animals, when you talk about free will doesn't explain why animals suffer because they don't have free will, right? They're not rational creatures. They don't have the ability to choose between good or bad because they're not rational. They're not conscious. They're unaware of what's going on. So they want to say that those theodicies.
We all hate ads. That's a fact. The real question is, why don't you have an ad blocker yet? The internet is so overrun with ads.
That people typically appeal to. Someone like Cliffe, someone like Stuart, they're going to appeal to free will to explain why they're suffering in the world. And they want to say, well, it doesn't explain animal suffering. It's just a plain fact that it is false, that there are no theodicies that are effective at explaining non-human suffering. You might think that. Again,
I don't think he said that, dog. All right. He says the ones that people, he gave a list of them, and I assume those are the ones that these philosophers typically use to remedy like the whole animal suffering sort of thing. He's saying those don't really work. All right. He's not saying there's none of them exist. Okay. So you got to pay attention, buddy, my dude.
It's also the idea that none of them effectively explain animal suffering presumably isn't something that Alex knows is wrong but is saying anyways. He just believes that none of them are effective. They probably just disagree about that fact, about whether or not any of these theodicies are effective in dealing with that.
Right.
Yeah, right. Because presumably, let's say if Cameron over here takes the soul building and Alex knows about the soul building, but he just doesn't think it's effective, he can still say, yeah, none of them are effective, and that's still consistent with
He's not lying. He's not being dishonest. He's not saying things that he knows there's a counterexample to or that he knows is false.
Yeah.
That they don't work or something along those lines, but at least acknowledge them, at least interact with them, say something, like at least name it and say, well, okay, that doesn't work for this reason. I can continue this clip here, but do you guys have any other?
Did he name the list? He named free will and some other thing.
He wanted Alex to name their favorite niche theodicy for animal suffering.
Not just that, but give a reason as to why he denies. But this is Alex's opening. He's probably just gonna list maybe quickly. I'm assuming they have a time.
It sounds like he's already asking for defeaters for something that hasn't been brought up yet.
Exactly. That's what he's doing. He's saying, well, Alex knows that there's these theodicies that deal with animal suffering. Why didn't he bring these up and explain why they don't work? Well, his debate opponent didn't bring them up. I mean, he might have a response, and he might just be waiting for them to be brought up in order to give his response.
Right.
I'm not gonna give my interlocutor ammunition for my position. Like, are you crazy?
The thoughts before we continue?
No, the one thing I'll just add on really quick here, just in case there's any lack of clarity here. Alex is, in this case, making a really strong claim that none of these can even begin to explain animal suffering. It's not the case that
not what he's saying.
These are attempts, and I think...
Stan, buddy, I love you, bro. You got a track, though.
Yeah, he's saying it's logically
straight
impossible.
out, they do not explain.
What'd you say, Brandon?
I was like, yeah, he's saying it's logically impossible. That's what's happening.
No, he said they're not effective. They're not effective at explaining.
Okay.
No, he did say they're not effective at explaining non-human suffering.
Yeah, then I would like to hear why.
Yeah, I would say on kind of a surface level.
Then maybe you should ask him.
Well, if you're taking sort of the surface level theodicies and so on, you can see why he's going. And I'm saying this because, you know, as someone who's debated, sometimes you toss out an objection, and you're basically giving your opponent the opportunity to respond to it and to say no, these theodicies can explain this. But so for anyone who isn't familiar with what's going on here, so you have theodicies, and I think Alex just mentioned free will theodicies and soul building. There are dozens of theodicies. These are explanations for why God might allow reasons for God to allow various kinds of evil, natural evil in the world. And what Alex is pointing out there is that some of the most common theodicies, like God respects our free will, but therefore must also give us the ability to misuse our free will. Alex is saying, in effect, what's that got to do with animals? Why would that have something to do with animals? And then soul building, that because human beings go through different kinds of struggles, we can develop virtues like courage and so on. And therefore, it's ultimately good for us. You go through bad things, but it's for a good purpose. And he's saying, what does that have to do with it? William Rowe gave the most famous example of a deer who gets horribly burned in a forest fire, something like this, and suffers for a few days. Nothing good ever comes out of that. And so he's basically saying, hey, the standard theodicies that people give, they don't apply to this other category of animal suffering. And then sounds like Cameron is saying, actually, there are theodicies. And you could even apply the theodicies that he mentioned in a way that they have something to say about animal suffering. But
the free will theodicy can be extended to include animal suffering. So can the soul building theodicy.
Yeah.
These are not new moves. These are.
I think it's really not clear that Alex would disagree with any of what's being said right now. It's not clear that Alex would disagree that there are these theodicies that exist and that many of the mainstream theodicies could be modified in some way to deal with animal suffering.
Yeah.
But he just wouldn't think that those are effective. Right.
Exactly.
And so that's where the discussion needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And if that's something you think he's being disingenuous about because he's not bringing them up, well, maybe the guy he's debating should be like more well-read on this stuff and he should bring up those objections.
Not even that, just to like ask for a defense for the theodicy, like a defense as to why those theodicies are not themselves effective. You know, why should he give a defense for against all these theodicies? Like, why would we expect that? Just whatever Cliff and what was Stuart? Cliff and Stuart think it's the best theodicies. Just wait till the back and forth or their opening statement or whatever.
Yeah. It could be like maybe his strategy is to wait for that best defense and then to like undermine it, you know?
Yeah.
We don't have to like.
One thing I want to point out is that the only reason that we're nitpicking this so much is because these guys, instead of opening with like, hey, Alex said this, we have these ideas as responses to it, and we would like to hear Alex respond to these objections and tell us how he gets around these objections. Instead, they open it by saying, well, you know, Alex knows that what he's saying is wrong and he's saying it anyways, and sort of these implications that he's trying to pull a fast one on the guy that he's debating. That's why we're nitpicking this so much.
So I haven't seen this, but correct me if I'm wrong, because I've seen some debates in modern day debate where the people who are partnering share a time limit. So like where they have a time constraint, let's say like 10 minutes, and between the two parties, they share that time limit. Is that what's going on in this debate? Do we know that or no? We'll probably find out in a couple minutes, but that's something that I should.
Well, Amder, you've seen it, right?
What was Ferdy? What were you asking?
What I'm saying is that like basically. What I'm saying is that like it seems.
Piece of shit.
What I'm saying is that maybe like a reason that Alex might not find it necessary to like, you know, provide some robust defense as to why theodicies aren't effective is because a time constraint. Like if let's say him and Phil are sharing a time limit, then it's probably just it's not gonna.
It's modern day debates. Each team has an allotted opening time, and it's split between the two people on that team. So
yeah, so that might be like a reason as to why Alex is not gonna be defending all these against all these theodicies, or like because Phil still needs to talk or something.
It might be waste all his time going through all the theodicies. Like, bro, just focus on the main ones, and so we can be.
Well, he also might be doing that because he knows that there's the majority of the debate is set aside for back and forth. So any sort of objections are going to be way easier to hash out when you're conversing with somebody than when you're just giving
That's also
a monologue.
That's a good reason.
So yeah. But let's try to get more into the actual meat of the discussion.
Yeah.
Alex has gone into the literature about animal suffering to the point that, and I would agree with him, the people that deny that animals suffer in any kind of meaningful sense, I would agree with Alex that that's false. The problem is when you look at that literature, on top of that, you also find that animals can have the capacity, not to the extent humans can, but they have the capacity to reflect and find meaning in their lives. They have purpose in their lives. But I don't know how you can say that and then also say something like the saint-making theodicy doesn't apply to animals.
Yeah, there's a 2014 book on animal suffering from Trent Doherty. Again, it's been out since 2014, and I'm pretty sure I remember pointing it out to Alex. I've mentioned it on numerous occasions. A lot of people don't think that it works, but again, it exists. Like, acknowledge it, interact with it, give some sort of reason to think that the theodicy fails, and
bring it up then. Like, if he doesn't think he's not going to bring it up if he doesn't think it's worth discussing. It's also the onus is on like his interlocutor to bring up these sorts of like rejoinders. Like, come on, dog.
We're not hearing any of that. And what he says here,
I can't tell if he wants Alex to address these concerns in this debate, or if he is just begging for him to talk to him on his channel or something, or do like,
or make a video about it, something like that.
It seems like he wants Alex to talk about these things in the debate. That's how it's coming off as. It's like, bro, I don't know. It's like you're mentioning like the like there's no substantive responses to animal suffering. There's this, there's this. And they're even asking questions like, why didn't you bring this up? These things exist. Stuff like that. It's like,
right, yeah. It seems super strange. I don't know.
Yeah, it is very strange.
Cliffe and Stuart, these guys are preachers. They're not going to know about these theodicies or different ways that these really highfalutin philosophers have
get fucked. Sorry, like
tried to extend the theodicies to actually still take care of animal suffering. Like these guys, and Alex knows this. Alex knows that Cliffe is just a regular dude. Like he's a pastor. He's not a philosopher. And this is what was embarrassing to me when I was hearing Alex explain this, is that it's just it's just bad.
Did Alex like hold a gun to this guy's head and tell him like, agree to this debate or I'm gonna pull the trigger? Did he say, I have your family held hostage if you don't debate me? That's it. They're gone.
Yeah, like
is that what happened here?
If Cliffe and Stuart didn't prepare adequately, that's just not on Alex.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Did they know what the debate proposition was ahead of time?
I think
presumably.
So.
Yeah, presumably. Well, if that's the case, then get fucked. Get fucked, bro. Sorry.
Not make free moral decisions. They do not have moral souls that can develop through strife. It's controversial even to suggest that they'll simply be compensated in some kind of fluffy afterlife.
Yeah, I'm gonna talk about that part in just a minute, because in the video that I mentioned earlier, this response that I made, this 40-minute response that I made 2 years ago, we're gonna watch an argument that I gave in that video, which gives an argument for animal immortality in the afterlife.
Sorry.
Again, this stuff exists. You can go interact with it if you want to, but to say that it's...
Sorry, I'm just anticipating some buffoonery. My bad.
He just can't help but to like keep talking about his videos and wanting a response.
It's too good.
I don't like it.
I want to hear today a direct answer. How can the suffering of a deer on its own in a forest, with its leg broken and trapped under a tree, already starving in confused agony, before being predated upon by having a mountain lion clasp the deer's windpipe in its jaw for an excruciating minutes-long death, be explained if supervised by an omnipotent invigilator who, if for some reason could not prevent this particular event, seemingly could have at least designed the machinery of the natural world to be less prone to this kind of thing?
Yeah. So that's basically the end of his little spiel. He didn't have a ton of time to kind of lay out his argument. Oh, by the way, David, if you don't, I don't think I announced this at the beginning.
He didn't have enough time. That's
they
crazy.
Even recognize it. That's crazy.
The audacity. The audacity. This is YouTube, right? I can say the N-word, right?
Michael, you're muted.
You're muted.
Oh, probably. I don't know what YouTube's terms of service are.
The audacity of this nigga. The audacity. All right, that's what I want to say.
Topic of their debate is whether or not the biblical God exists, which is a little bit strange that he's even talking about the problem of evil. We'll talk about this a little bit later.
Yeah,
it's a little bit strange.
Wait. Yeah, matter of fact,
I don't just to
in a weird
say one
way
thing there. I'm not sure why it would be strange to be talking about the problem of evil in that context, because presumably whatever the biblical God is going to be, minimally it's going to include things like omnipotent, omnibenevolent, omniscient, the standard sort of traits that God has. And so as long as it has those, then it's appropriate to deploy problem of evil against it, even if it's a more specific version, even if you're talking about, the God of the Old Testament and not, the Islamic God or something. It's still going to be the sort of God conception that's susceptible to those challenges. So I don't know why it's odd for him to bring up the problem of evil there.
Facts.
Kind of makes his argument less effective because the God of the Bible wouldn't allow suffering. Like, what are you talking about?
Okay. Later on, I've got a clip of this. Phil says that the problem of evil is an internal critique. It's like an internal problem for Christians. I've had. Oh man, this is gonna trigger me.
I'm glad you brought that up, Cameron. Because
don't say something stupid.
The thing that Alex said that I didn't catch the first time was that Alex just kind of smuggled in this part of his argument that that animals don't have souls. But it's like, I actually haven't really talked to any Christians that believe that. So,
I don't know what your guys' views on that, but a lot of Christians I've talked to, I thought it was very common. That was a common view that animals don't have souls.
I don't think I have empirics on that. I'm not sure if Fan has empirics on that, but so all I would be doing would be adding anecdotes here. I mean, I've talked to a lot of Christians who don't think the animals have souls, but I can't, make any stronger statement about what most Christians believe from that. So
fair enough.
Is this an actual internal critique or not? Like, Alex kind of smuggles that in as a way to support his argument because of his perceived model of Christianity.
Yeah,
if it's an internal critique and it doesn't actually address your position, then presumably you're going to attack one of the premises of the argument. Something can still be an internal critique even though one of the premises is false. So I'm not sure what you're saying there, Sam.
And it might be that it's an internal critique that targets Cliffe and Stuart's views and doesn't target Than's views. I mean, not every critique targets every view.
It's so weird. It's so weird. So weird.
It's also
you're right. It is very weird. Very weird.
So it's also weird. It's also a weird little side note. So the example he gave was the exact same example that I brought up as the most famous example because that was
not
William
the exact
Rose.
same. It's very close. Very close. Still
that was yeah. So you have William Rose. Yeah, he said dies after minutes or something like that.
He said that there's a lion that comes and bites its neck and stuff. I think in Rose's case, it was
it was a forest fire. It was a forest fire, something like that. Okay, so deer in the woods. But what's interesting about that? So Roe, for everyone who's watching, historically, the argument from evil was presented as a kind of logical problem that if you have these certain beliefs, you have an internal inconsistency in your thinking. If you believe in an all-powerful, all-knowing, perfectly good being, and you believe that evil and suffering exist, you actually have a contradiction in your thinking. Alvin Plantinga famously destroyed that, and William Roe took things in an evidential direction where he's saying it's not that you have a contradiction in your thinking, it's just that evil and suffering of various kinds provide a kind of evidence against the existence of God.
I wouldn't say it's destroyed. It's still something that's very controversial and debated to this day. So I would slow down.
Yeah. So my understanding, and I could be wrong on this, but the problem with what Plantinga did in the free will defense, basically he just gave a possible instance where you can have what he calls transworld depravity, and transworld depravity is just whenever you create a world with free agents. It's just necessarily they're just going to be at least one instance in which they fail or something, or they do something wrong. So it's just given because of their nature, like giving trans world depravity. All nature suffer from this. That's kind of like what the, from my understanding, planting this free will defense is doing. It's just God is not just constrained by logical, or it's not necessarily, he's not constrained by logical stuff or logical possibilities. He's constrained rather by, things that are metaphysically necessary. And one of those things is like going to be the nature of like free agents. Free agents must at least once within their life do something evil or something like that. That's how I'm understanding the free will defense. It's not about free will itself, rather it's about that the nature, we're constrained, God is constrained to create free beings by their nature. They're like have to, at least in one instance, can do something evil. That's how I'm understanding that. It's not just the free will defense. That's not enough to get you there.
Bars.
So lots of people are familiar with that. Anyone who takes a course in philosophy of religion or something like that, William Rowe's going to come up in there, and you're going to have to read. His famous article. But most people don't know William Rowe eventually rejected his own arguments. He actually agreed with the skeptical theists that to make an argument out of that, to say, "Oh, look at this suffering. I can't think of any reason for a good God to allow this suffering. Therefore, there probably is no reason. Therefore, there probably is no God." He said, we have smuggled in the assumption that if God had reasons for allowing these kinds of suffering, we would have access to those reasons. And he said, and there's no good reason to assume that. So he, towards the end, took things in a Bayesian direction, like Paul Draper. He offered a Bayesian argument from evil to try and avoid the mistake of his earlier arguments. And so, yeah, guys, it's important to keep in mind that people who've offered these arguments and popularized them sometimes reject their own arguments, and people don't pay attention to their refutation of their own argument, but they still cling to the old argument. Just like you'll still have atheists who cling to the logical argument from evil, even though almost no one at the philosophical level takes that seriously anymore.
I don't think that's true.
It depends which one you run. There's a couple, but yeah, we'll just leave it there.
I was gonna say, Than, you mentioned Bayes. Than is a big Bayes guy. I like it too.
Yeah, if
why don't we do this?
I like it too. I just don't think it does what you think it does.
Onto you. That's
let's do this. So I'm gonna go over this argument that I gave in this video, which I honestly think Alex was planning to do a response to it, but then just never got around to it. So he may just not have even watched it. But this is an argument based on a paper from Dustin Crummett, where he gives this is one of the arguments. I think he gives 6 arguments in his paper for animal immortality, and this is one of those arguments. And Alex has reason to endorse or accept every single premise. And so to say that, like, he was using a lot of rhetorical flourishes in the debate in his opening statement, like, oh well, there's no fluffy afterlife and stuff. Like, please interact with the stuff. Please interact with the literature. Premise 1:
if there's nothing in front of him, he can't interact with it. Just stop. Like, what are you doing? He's not going to interact with something that hasn't been said. Please stop doing that.
If you're asking him to interact with it now, fine. If you're expecting that he interacted with it during the debate, it just seems like a bizarre expectation to have.
Yeah.
But he needs to interact with the literature, i.e. Capturing Christianity's video on this argument. Let's see what we've got here.
Here we go.
Agent can benefit an individual with moral standing, and there is no sufficiently good reason for the agent not to provide.
Therapy has always been such a scary idea to me because I simply did not know where to get started. I didn't know how to find my person.
The benefit. The agent has a duty to so benefit the individual. Premise 2: non-human animals with interests are individuals with moral standing. By the way, I do go into a defense of the premises in just a second, so we'll watch that too. It's not very long.
I'm guessing by moral standing here,
non-human animals with interest by giving them eternal.
I'm guessing by moral standing here we mean something like they're moral patients. That's sort of how I'm interpreting this. I'm not sure if any of you have a different idea about what's going on here.
Yeah, maybe. If by more patience you mean like they're given moral consideration or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I that's how I'm interpreting this.
Yeah. So then, I think premise 1 is pretty clearly wrong, but I'm curious. Maybe we should watch the whole, see what the whole argument is.
Yeah. Let's do that.
Eternal, infinitely good afterlives. 4, there is no sufficiently good reason for God not to do so. 5, God has a duty to benefit non-human animals with interest by giving them eternal, infinitely good afterlives. That follows from 1 through 4. 6, God acts in accordance with God's duties. 7, animal universalism, i.e. the view that all non-human animals with interest will receive an eternal, infinitely good afterlife, is true. And this follows from premises 5 and 6. Let me point this out before we get to the defense of the premises, that this is a logically valid argument. So in order to avoid the conclusion of animal universalism, you have to reject one of the premises in the argument. And so if you present this to somebody who is trying to give this argument from evil, focusing on animal suffering, and you give them this argument, they've got to reject one of the premises if they want to reject the conclusion that animal universalism is true. Okay, just want to point that out before we get into a defense of these premises. All right, so let's now go through these premises one by one and just give a quick defense of them. So the first premise seems pretty straightforward. If I could heal a terminally ill stranger in Europe by pressing a red button, and I have no good reason not to press the button, it seems pretty obvious, seems like at least that I'm obligated to press it. Premise 2 basically just says that some animals are owed some kind of moral consideration. And I don't think that this is a premise that Alex, a proponent of ethical veganism, can reasonably deny. As an so he's now I think flipped on this. So right, he's no longer an ethical vegan. It's been a while since this video came out, but nevertheless, I think he'd still would endorse this premise.
Yeah, Alex O'Connor.
Even if you're putting up the argument from animal suffering, it seems exactly that you're going to entail.
Yeah, you've got to endorse this premise. Ethical vegan, Alex believes that animals are owed moral considerations, i.e. we shouldn't factory farm them. Premise 3 is also pretty obvious. Animal immortality seems to be within the metaphysical boundaries of God's omnipotence. One objection that you might have to this premise is that God is not a moral agent. He doesn't have any moral obligations. So I don't think that Alex would necessarily raise this objection, but many theists might. So I'll just quickly note that the argument could be recast in terms of perfect love instead of moral obligations. It's not that big of a deal. So as for premise 4, as a proponent of the problem of evil, 4 is actually a premise that Alex should be inclined to accept if you just look at it. 5 follows from 1 through 4. Premise 6 is also pretty obvious. Even if God has 0 moral obligations, it's still true that for any duties he has, he complies with them. All right. Okay, so yeah, so we've got an argument here for animal universalism and animal immortality. We've got to see some interaction with this. Atheists need to start interacting with this when they level the problem of animal suffering. Please, guys, if you any small time atheist YouTubers, any big time atheist YouTubers that are watching this video, if any of this is triggering you, please respond to arguments like
that's
this.
us. That's our
Where's
cue.
this in the Bible?
Yeah. Can we get the can we get the premises? Can we get the premises back on the screen?
Let's go back and all 7 of them. There you go.
One thing I want to say before addressing the actual argument here. I'm echoing from someone. I can hear myself. I'm not sure who it is, but I don't think animal universalism alone is a theodicy. You need something in addition to animal universalism to get a full-fledged theodicy out of this. So I don't understand the framing of here's this argument for animal universalism. The atheists need to address this or they can't run the problem of animal suffering. Why not? This isn't a theodicy. You need something like the sort of afterlife. Maybe you could add something like the sort of suffering that the animals go through is requirement to this afterlife, or the animals retroactively consent to the things that were done to them in this afterlife. They see that led to where they need to be. There's a few different ways. I know Doherty argues for that once the animals are in this afterlife, they're able to look back similar to how humans are and see that this suffering led to growth of character in ways that they would now assent to and say, well, yeah, this got me to where I am now. This needed to happen. In the grand scheme of things, this was a good thing. But just the fact alone that animals have some eternal afterlife, that doesn't tell you anything about whether or not the suffering that they received when they weren't in the afterlife is evidence against theism or not. That it still seems surprising on theism that there would be that suffering if they could have also had the afterlife without the suffering.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Unless they think that the sort of suffering that they experienced in their life is necessarily instrumental to their afterlife or something like that. But that's going to be very strange.
Yeah, does he think that I think I mentioned this to Michael earlier. Let's say we increase the dial on all the animals, they're suffering to its max. Is it now that because they're all going to be sent to, you know, doggy heaven or whatever, does that no longer count as evidence against theism?
Right. Like if you have some possible world where the animals are suffering tremendously, the max amount of suffering they can possibly have for 100 trillion years, and then after that 100 trillion years of nothing but suffering, they have in afterlife, an eternal, infinitely good afterlife. Is that sort of world evidence against theism? I think it's obvious that would be evidence against theism.
Right. I think another thing, I don't know.
All right, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, buddy. Good, no, you're good.
You're going to say something more on topic, so go ahead.
Oh, maybe, I don't know. I was just going to say that, like, let's say this argument does go through. I do think what you were saying, Amdir, is still true, but also, like, if you're trying to, like, add more, theoretical content to your worldview, we all know what that does. Given that you got a Bayesian dude up there, he should know that, like, adopting these sorts of theodicies is going to decrease the prior probability of theism or your particular flavor of theism being true.
Yeah, like I don't see. It's just I don't see how this animal heaven solves the problem at all. Is it just?
Yeah, it seems like you're unnecessarily inflating.
You're adding something for no reason.
Problem, and you don't even deal with the problem.
Yeah.
I want to try to anticipate an objection here that actually this argument shows that animal universalism is an entailment of theism.
Yeah,
and so,
it falls from the theory. I was anticipating that. Go ahead.
Well, one thing to say is that unless the premises of the argument are entailed by theism, it seems like instead of the conclusion, animal universalism being your auxiliary hypotheses, you're just going to have a few other auxiliary hypotheses that entail animal universalism. So namely, premise 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6. And some of those might be more plausible than others, but those are going to be auxiliary hypotheses. So they're also going to inflate your theory.
That's right.
I think that Cameron really wants somebody to give a response to this argument, though. So even though it's not super relevant to the problem of evil thing, I want to try to give him some response to this. I think one seems wrong. The reason one seems wrong is imagine a case where you have two goods of equal value, and there's no reason for you not to give them either one, but they're mutually exclusive goods. So you have good one, good two. Good one and good two are mutually exclusive goods, and there's no reason for you not to provide an agent with either good one or good two. On this case, it seems like it's actually really unclear whether or not an agent has a moral obligation to provide them with any one of those specific goods. It doesn't seem like there's any obligation to provide them with good one. It would be just as right for them to provide them with good two, and it also doesn't seem like they have any moral obligation to provide them with good two, because they could just as easily give them good one, and it would be just as good. But it's impossible for them to give them both of those things. So then it seems to me there needs to be more there for there to be a moral obligation than just that there is no sufficiently good reason not to provide the benefit, and that thing benefits the individual. That doesn't seem to me like it's enough to get you a moral obligation. So premise 1 seems wrong to me. And there might be more objections other than that. Like maybe you want to substitute out non-human animals with human animals in the argument and see, well, if he rejects, human universalism, where in the parity argument would he think that goes wrong for human universalism? And that might be applicable to the non-human case. So maybe you want to say something like that there is a sufficiently good reason for God not to give human animals the eternal, infinitely good afterlife because they chose to reject God, and what would actually satisfy their desires is living eternally separated from him. Well, if we're granting that animals can take on this rational nature upon death, then maybe we could just also make the same move and say that 4 is false. Maybe there is a sufficiently good reason for God not to give them the afterlife, and that might hold some sway if you're Christian non-universalists. So not saying those are be-all end-all responses, but that's something to think about for premise 1, premise 4.
Fire. That was good.
Fire.
But
all right.
Yeah, I don't have nothing against. Yeah, on the same boat there.
Yeah, I was also gonna say in response to premise 1, MD, you were saying something about how like you might require some more like content in order for you to establish that God has like an obligation to do something. And it seems like, well, if that's the case, and you have to like make further assumptions or embed further content into the theory, then like in your attempt to like redefine premise 1 or to defend premise 1, it seems like you also have to like inflate the theory. But that might be a little bit.
You might be committed. You might be committed to the fact that like there's also no equal goods or something like that, or there's nothing that nothing that God is also committed to that provides a benefit that is incompatible with an eternal afterlife or something like that.
Yeah, and you have to demonstrate that falls from your flavor of theism, and if not, that's just going to be just more theoretical postulates, and we know that the Bayesian guys don't like to do that. All right.
Okay, just want to point that out before we get into a defense of these premises. All right, so let's now go through these premises one by one and just give a quick defense of them. So the first premise seems pretty straightforward. If I could heal a terminally ill stranger in Europe by
we already
pressing the
watched
red
this
button,
part. We can
and I have no good reason not to press the button,
Skip to the end of this section.
Follows from its David, what are you thinking in this video? I did provide some passages that support animal immortality in this video. So if you guys want to go check those out, I just put them on the screen real quickly. Yeah, David, what are your thoughts on this argument? I'll pull it up back on the screen so you can see. There we go.
I don't know if we care
really,
about
as far as this argument is concerned.
Stuff.
If Alex is saying that that animal suffering is some kind of evidence that the God of the Bible doesn't exist or something like that, then yeah, he would have to rule out responses like this. I just want to point out he's got a problem either way. Like even if you
he could accept the argument and still think it's evidence against God's existence.
Right. Weren't appealing to some sort of afterlife for animals or something like that, which he can't rule out. Like how do you know God? How do you know God isn't going to do something like this? You've offered an argument for why God would or could, but as far as it's like okay, you have to rule this out. Then in addition to that, even if animals had no afterlife and so on, there are responses to animal suffering, and so it's just I don't know. It's always the animal suffering. I see why they go in the direction of animal suffering because it is more difficult to apply human-centered theodicies to animals, and so it's a kind of like, aha,
it's honestly not that hard.
It's not.
It's not that hard.
I would say it is pretty hard if you want to maintain theoretical simplicity, but that's just me.
Might also be hard if you.
Yes, it is. If I'm talking about.
Might also be hard if you want your theodicies to be somewhat plausible, but that's just me.
Well,
if I'm talking about human beings developing virtue and so on, people tend not to think of animals in that way, even though animals can learn and so on. So, and it's always built into the idea that we're talking about human beings who are developing virtues that are going to extend, onto eternity and so on. So you're talking about some big picture type stuff. Whereas you're thinking about your cat dying and breaking its leg and something like that, then you normally wouldn't apply that same kind of reasoning to human. To be fair, no, I think there are all kinds of theodicies, including will theodicy and soul building theodicy that you can apply to animals if you actually expand on things and flesh things out. But yeah, I don't think it's. Yeah, I just don't see it as really particularly strong evidence against the existence of God once you put everything on the table.
Yeah, we're also going to get into some stuff in a little bit on some of the claims that they make on the side of atheism, where they make these really sad claims. I'm calling them sad. It's almost worse than that. But like a lot of atheists will say, "Oh, well, evil and suffering is expected. What I would expect if atheism were true," and it triggers me to no end.
I would expect nothing if atheism. Were true. That's what I would.
It triggers me to no end when atheists make this claim. It just like where is this prediction coming from?
Yeah.
I don't.
By the way,
I don't know if this is stupid to say, but one thing I would expect if atheism were true, that there would be no God.
Oh, I think that a charitable way to interpret atheists who say that you would expect there to be animal suffering if atheism was true is just that you would more expect to see it on atheism than theism. I think that's a little bit of a more charitable way to interpret that statement.
Of course.
You know, and it's good that we're getting there, because that's my ultimate problem. That is my ultimate problem with.
I've got a good analogy for it, actually, too.
With the problem of evil, like based on expectations, and what they're thinking is, yeah, if you had a universe and if you had life, and if evolution is the only game in town of how you got there, then that would involve suffering. So therefore, if you're actually like abstracting and just saying, okay, let's start off, no creator versus a creator, what are you expecting? Go. Like, okay, well, on one, I might expect something to be created. On the other one, I would expect nothing.
Yeah.
So right there, and then you say, okay, if you got a universe on either hypothesis,
I'm not even sure if that's even intelligible.
I wasn't listening to that part.
Well,
it's like if you have like a universe, atheism is true in one, theism is true in the other. On the atheistic universe, he would expect nothing, or expect there to be nothing, or something like that. And I'm like, I don't know what that even fucking means.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I probably need like a.
I'm not exactly sure what content in the atheist hypothesis raises the probability of there being nothing compared to something. I'm really not sure what's doing that. What's making that prediction?
Need a semantic analysis there, buddy, my dude.
On the God hypothesis, I might expect a finely tuned universe, because God would have reasons to, make living things. On the other side, I would expect, since it's vastly more probable to get a non-life permitting universe, I'd expect a non-life permitting universe if you got one at all. And so you just kind of go down.
I'm not sure if that's true.
I think there are theistic hypotheses where I certainly would expect to see a life permitting universe much more than I would expect to see it on atheism. But I don't think that any of those hypotheses are more probable than atheism after you update on the fine-tuning data.
That's right. And I think you can actually make a case. Well, I guess it depends on your flavor of theism and the theodicies that you have, that like it's actually more expected under your flavor of theism that God doesn't create at all. Like there's no life permitting conditions or nothing. But that also just depends on your particular view. So, because that could be something that's entailed from your view.
Okay, would you expect life? Well, I would on the theistic hypothesis, or at least much more so than on the non-theistic hypothesis. You could kind of go down the road all to life, to human consciousness, to our reasoning ability, to our moral sense, and so you could, and it becomes like insanely more probable. All the evidence massively favors theism over atheism. So when it's just, oh, well, we had expected on our hypothesis, but not on yours. Like, have you seen what you need for your argument to even work over here? Have you seen all the things within your claim that fit massively better with theism than they do with atheism?
Right.
How are you putting together like 50 things?
Can I say this real quick? I just wanna. I want to say something, because I just want it to be known. This conversation wasn't about, my understanding of it, wasn't about whether atheism or theism is true. It was about whether does the biblical God exists.
Right.
So criticizing atheism as like not predicting certain data, that's just doesn't solve the issue. Because like let's just say we do grant it doesn't predict the certain data. Let's just say let's say we have theism and then we have some non-theistic hypothesis or whatever. Or like just group all those together or whatever. Mm-hmm. The thing is that whether suffering is unexpected on theism is unexpected, that just serves as evidence against theism. It's not especially the biblical God, because the biblical God is a type of theism. Now that just leads us against theism and gets us closer to the non-theistic hypothesis may be.
Or it could lead you towards theistic hypothesis that aren't the biblical God, right? There could be some theistic hypotheses that aren't omnitheism. They're not, theism as it's traditionally thought and understood, and those versions might not be affected at all by problems of evil. And so
so keep in mind, even if Alex and Phil in the debate ended up entertaining, and I don't even see the debate, so I don't know how if they did or didn't. Even if Alex and Phil entertained questions about defending atheism or whatever, that's literally a separate discussion. That is just not the topic. Yeah, it's literally not the topic at hand. The topic was about does the biblical God exist? Right.
I mean, in addition to that, I think that if you're an atheist, you can just grant everything this guy just said. Consciousness, fine-tuning, the fact that the universe exists, that people have rational faculties, all that massively favors theism or some version of theism over atheism. But I think the problem comes in when you try to get from those data points massively favor some version of theism over atheism to, now that we've updated the hypothesis on this data, theism is more probable than atheism. I think that's where it's going to go wrong. Because I think what they're doing is they're comparing a very specific hypothesis to a very general hypothesis. And so
that's right. Yep.
There's going to be priors to take into account there. And I think that most people, when they talk about this stuff, they are way too generous with the priors that they afford to these theist hypotheses.
Yeah.
But I don't want to get into a big fine-tuning or design argument discussion here.
I was also going to say, I think a lot of these theists who render these sort of like probabilistic arguments, I think they underestimate the impacts of these sorts of priors, like on their positions, and how that, like, you know, with the impact of these priors, it could just be the case that, like, after you update them using Bayes' theorem and all that stuff, like, it just turns out it's not more probable than that, like, whatever the alternative hypothesis you're trying to compare it to. So I just can't stress this enough. Like, priors are like a big fucking deal when it comes to like Bayes' theorem. So I just have to, because it's something that, like, I've had a problem with talking to a lot of the Bayesian guys before. So
favor theism over naturalism, and you somehow say it all adds up to favoring naturalism. It sounds insane to me.
Dude, you hit the nail on the head, and I've got an amazing.
They didn't say that, to be clear.
It might not favor the data might not favor theism, but because of, like, the theoretical postulates and the priors and all that stuff, atheism could just win out after updating the priors, right? Were you, it sounded like you're going to say something, Freddie?
Oh no, I just said they didn't say that naturalism. I didn't watch the debate, but they're not talking about naturalism. So he mentioned something about naturalism.
No, Alex is not a naturalist. He's an agnostic, but so if he was a naturalist, presumably he'd be an atheist.
True.
Clip we're gonna play is amazing. It's gonna show you the different, like, things that they have to work into their hypothesis. Yeah. Oh man. Thean, do you have anything to add to?
I know you're not
talking.
No, I mean, David did a really good job on his rant with my problem here. And I'll save my rant for when we play the clip.
Okay. So this next one,
just one more thing. Going to your particular argument. So I think that skeptical theism makes some very, very important points, namely that you know, we basically know the tiniest little bit of what God would know, and therefore it's kind of weird when we proceed as if in our argumentation we know what God's thinking in all of this, or we know God's reasons. So as far as you putting forward your argument there, to me it's like, whether I agree with it or not, it's the idea is that there are these possibilities. It's like, okay, is that something that God could be thinking? Yes, absolutely. Do I know that God's thinking that? No. But it's like, if we can come up with possible reasons for God to allow suffering, so free will theodicy, soul building theodicy, and dozens of other theodicies, and we can say these are all possible reasons for God to allow.
What's up, buddy?
Yeah, this is like, I thought they were talking about the evidential, like a type of evidential style of animal suffering type argument. I thought that's what they were talking about.
Yeah, what I understood Alex to be bringing up was evidential problem of animal suffering.
So I don't know what we're talking about, possibility here, but it's also possible that God has no reason to allow evil, right?
Yeah.
If we're just talking about mere possibility, right? It's possible that
it's also possible that the animal suffering isn't instrumental to some greater good. right? And because you're a skeptical theist, like that sort of information is like unaccessible to you. So under determination much?
Yeah, just saying it's possible God has unknown reasons to allow evil.
One thing I'll say is the skeptical theist is probably going to be happy with under determination, because ultimately what they want to say is that the probability of animal suffering on theism is inscrutable or something.
Wait, they're saying the episthetic probability?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
For God to allow some suffering,
one thing you might say in response to that is that if you know that something is not super unexpected on one hypothesis, but it's inscrutable on another hypothesis, you might think you would prefer the hypothesis where there is a probability assigned and it's not crazy low probability.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Do we know that this one is correct or that one is correct or something like that? No, for me, it's like, okay, if we, with our little bit of information, can come up with all these possible reasons and God would know massively more than us, it's almost like, how can you say with a straight face there can't be these reasons when, even given our limited intellect, we can come up with all kinds of them, especially ones that fit with the God of the Bible. That's kind of my thinking in all this. So in other words, when you give an argument, I don't think, okay, does this argument prove your case? I was like, okay, does this argument show there's a possible theodicy that would apply in this situation?
And I think even Alex said, I thought Alex was specifically no known reasons earlier in the conversation when he was explaining the problem of evil and these theodicies. Didn't he say there's like, at least as of now, there's no effective. He didn't say he can't.
He didn't say it's logically impossible. There's a theodicy that applies to this case, or he said he doesn't think there's a theodicy that's effective in dealing with animal suffering. Yeah, I don't think that they're giving a logical problem here.
Let's get through a couple super chats here before we get to the next clip, and this one I think is pretty important. Based Autistic said he was looking forward to watching the live stream tonight.
I didn't know you left a comment on this video, Ferdy.
If you guys could pray, his name is Steve, I would deeply appreciate it. Thank you. God bless. So anyone here that is a Christian, please pray for Steve. You can pause the video, you can do it right now, or you can do it after the video ends, but please say a quick prayer.
Earlier, I mentioned I went to one question at the first question of the Q&A, but that was Based Autistic who asked the question in the debate.
Oh wow.
No.
All right, let's cover a couple more super chats here, and then we'll get to the next clip. Dr. Huff sounds like he sells extracurriculars. I don't really know what that means.
Loaves of bread. Both the last name Huff.
Oh, okay, Huff.
Yeah.
Is that supposed to be like the body of Christ reference or something?
Oh, okay. All right. Gwyneth Isaac says animals don't have free will, but they do suffer the effects of the fall, including death and suffering. It's curse on the whole earth. Yeah, no, this I think is also Cliffe's response. Yep. Phil and Alex point out that there was animal suffering before the fall, and so how do you explain that? And so you've got to have some sort of theodicy that extends beyond that, unless you want to say that the fall is a sort of it can kind of reach back in time, so to speak. Well, that's a little bit wacky.
If you look at a lot of the scholarship on early Israelite religions, like Michael Heiser is a big person that people love talking about. He'll point out that early Israelites didn't kind of conceive of one fall. There's typically like multiple falls that some people even talk about, like a pre-human fall where the rebelling divine council members rebelled against God and stuff like that. And so it gets a little deeper than that. But
well, yeah, and then the freedom there, I mean, often, yeah. That's one area where the free will theodicy can be extended to animal suffering. That fall, yeah. So
yeah, guys. So
I think
we mentioned theodicies. Want to be clear, like theodicy.
I think if someone's theodicy to deal with animal suffering was there was a council of demons and angels in heaven, and they had a fall, and somehow the results of their fall caused the animals to die violently in a cycle of natural selection, evolutionary history, then okay, fair enough. I'm good with that. If you walk up to someone on the street, and they've never heard of, let's just assume that they're starting their epistemic blank slate. They don't have their credences assigned yet to Christianity, atheism, and you're like, I want to know how likely you think this is. There is a council of angels and demons, and God, and they sort of started sinning and rebelling, and after that point, that caused animals to suffer consequences as a result of those angels and demons doing the wrong thing. And so billions of animals now die, and that's the reason why they die. And I asked them, how likely do you think that is? Maybe we can do, some people like to assign epistemic probabilities by talking about the lottery. Would you bet that that happened, or would you bet on that you're going to win the Powerball? I think most people are going to take the Powerball bet. I think most people would play 10 Powerballs before they take that bet. And then now we don't only have that theodicy, but we have the conjunction of that theodicy and theism. Right? Okay, all right. If you want to do that to your theory, feel free. I'm not going to stop you.
You read my mind.
I love it.
These are philosophical responses to why a God with certain attributes, usually all-knowing, all-powerful, and perfectly good, why that sort of God would allow the kinds of varieties of human and animal suffering that we see around us. When you're talking about a religion, then you can actually have religious explanations, like if you're talking about Judaism or Christianity or Islam or something like that. And so there, now you start talking about human beings are sinners. We live in a fallen world, things like that. And so that's why earlier when we were talking about the topic being the biblical God, we were like, wait, what? Because now you're dealing with a God who is aware of human sin and so on. And so how does that God interact? Well, you have that in the Bible. So in other words, long story short, if you read the Bible, how can you think that animal suffering is inconsistent or human or animal suffering is inconsistent with the God of the Bible? It's kind of taken for granted. And so weird to think that it would be inconsistent. Whereas if you're just starting off with a philosophical concept, then you don't have all that.
So Caleb is talking about kind of the same thing we were just talking about. That's why I wanted to cover it really quickly. He says free will can work as a theodicy if one argues that animal suffering is a result of free non-human agents like demons or Elohim. Alex ignores this. Yeah, Alex ignores this. Atheists ignore this, and really what they do is they express incredulity about it.
Well, you know why animals suffer, right? It's because there's like these little invisible niggas operating in the background.
Cameron says like all atheists do is express incredulity, as if that's like an inappropriate thing to do in response to that. I'm not sure that that's an inappropriate response here, especially when we're giving a Bayesian arguments and something like the prior probabilities of the various hypotheses at play are like very relevant to the success of the argument. I'm not sure that incredulity is an inappropriate response. Maybe if this was something that people like a lot of people found really plausible and I'm just the odd one out, sure, point taken. But I strongly suspect if I just start walking up to people and asking them, how often do you think that animal dying in the woods is doing that because a demon in heaven rebelled at some point, before animal suffering began? I don't think that they're going to disagree with me. That seems pretty unlikely.
What is Elohim? Do anybody know that? I don't know what that is.
No idea. I'm gonna be honest.
I don't know. All I know is like that just sounds like it just inflates the theory. That's all I. Yeah, there's like little demons operating, using their free will in the background, causing animals to suffer. It's crazy.
So they basically just say, "Oh, that's stupid. Whatever. Yeah, don't need to take that seriously." And that's not that's not how you do philosophy. It's not how you do argumentation or.
You said what?
Hebrew word for God or godhood, something like that.
Oh, non-human animals, like, oh, okay. Oh, so then like suffering is also could be a result of God just ordaining it or orchestrating it or something like that.
I don't know. That's what it says here.
We need to see more details.
Yeah,
we need to see a little bit more details filled into this theodicy.
Logic or anything like that. What you need to do is give some sort of reason to reject it, or especially if you're trying to provide some kind of internal critique of Christianity that literally outlines this.
Latina.
I love Monday.com.
What's Monday.com?
You don't know Monday.com? This is Monday.com.
In the Bible.
The Bible outlines a whole meta narrative of what you're going to expect to see about reality, and then when you see the things that the meta narrative says you're going to see, you somehow act like that's evidence against it.
Yeah, that's so dumb. But yeah, even in this debate, they want to say that.
No, because presumably, right, if you have like certain concepts like God, who's supposed to be like triomni, one of those things is like omnibenevolent, all that stuff, like those sorts of things like gratuitous evil, suffering, all that stuff, seemingly they're like incompatible or like unexpected on those given hypotheses, even though the book says that's what's going to be, that's what's going to transpire.
I think that what Than is wanting to say here, and Than can reach out and tell me if I'm wrong about this, is that the hypothesis isn't just that biblical theism is true or something. The hypothesis is that there's like some meta narrative about, there's like some sort of story, and that story includes themes like rebellion, redemption, and all the things that happen or sort of fall out from the hypothesis that there's this story, and if you make that the hypothesis instead of theism, then something like the demons rebelling is just a consequence of your hypothesis. It's not something that you're putting in conjunction with your hypothesis. Maybe I could be wrong. I could be wrong when I'm interpreting him there. That's what I think he is probably saying. And my pushback against that would be, I mean, something like this. So just take what I said before about the reason this animal is suffering is because the demons rebelled, and let's just grant that, or let's like grant the point I said earlier about the priors on that being extremely low. Let's say that has extraordinarily low priors. There can be disagreement about that, whatever. Can hash it out at a separate time. But let's just say that priors there are extraordinarily low. And then let's say that this meta-narrative hypothesis entails that animal suffering is because the angels and demons rebelled. Well, then the probability of that meta-narrative hypothesis can exceed the probability of the animal suffering because the angels and demons rebelled. Right. So you should lower how probable you think the meta-narrative hypothesis is in that case. That's how I would look at it. That's what you should do in response to that, finding that out, that if in fact your meta-narrative hypothesis doesn't tell that, what you should do upon finding that out is you should lower how likely you think that hypothesis is, because you know that it can exceed the probability of the animal suffering because the angels and demons rebelled.
Yeah, because presumably in this conversation, if let's say Cliff and Stuart were to give this response, right, this meta-narrative thing, what Alex could just turn around and say, okay, maybe you have explained the data, but now you've reduced now you're probably just reducing the likelihood of your hypothesis being true. So that just gives us evidence for believing the biblical God does not exist.
Yeah, and like something that compels me, like, just because we can say like all these things like fall from the theory, all that stuff, it doesn't like somehow supposed to salvage like the probability of the theory being true or something like that. Because like if the meta narrative is the thing is the thing that's like the hypothesis in question, okay, all you have to do is just look at the theoretical contents that the meta narrative postulates, and then you can just go, okay, like look, it's still like the probability is still extremely low, even though these things fall from that theory. Right?
It seems like the goal here is to avoid saying it's a conjunctive hypothesis, so it's theism and this other thing.
Yes.
And instead we want to say that theism entails this other thing. But I mean, I guess we've avoided saying that the probability of A and B is less than the probability of A, but we've avoided that at the cost of, I mean, now the probability of A can exceed B because A entails B. So
right.
I guess pick your poison.
That's right.
That it's this internal critique. Internal to what? Internal to what? And if it's internal to Christian doctrine, then guess what? You've got to interact with this and give some, I don't know, say something about it other than just laughing at it.
Just let me say a few words on this. I always try to break things because there's something called the curse of knowledge, namely that you guys understand what this person is talking about, but there are always people in the chat who don't understand. Like what?
I was mainly talking about demons. I think everyone knows about demons. I wasn't talking about the Elohim part.
Yeah,
is that what you're about to?
No, I mean with the demons, like people think, what, demons causing animal suffering? What? That's crazy. That's insane. I just wanted people to know like what the role is in all this argumentation. So I mentioned that once upon a time, for most of the time that this argument has been used, the problem with evil, it's been put forward as a logical contradiction in your thinking. That if you believe in this kind of God and you believe that evil exists, then you've got an actual contradiction somewhere in your thinking. So Alvin Plantinga, I mentioned that he's usually credited with the guy who destroys the logical version of, or turns people away from the logical arguments from evil. He pointed out, is it logically possible? Keep in mind, when you say logically possible, you're not saying it's reasonable. You're not saying it's the best explanation. You're not saying anything else. You're saying, is this at all possible? There are certain things that are impossible. Is this even possible? And so, is it possible that anytime something bad has happened, it's because God respects the free will of the demon or whatever it happens to be that's causing this suffering, and that he allows this because he respects the free will of that being. Even if you want to say that's completely ridiculous, and lots of people would, is it at least hypothetically possible? Is it in the realm? Put it this way: is it not impossible?
Sorry to pause it. I just got a Discord message from Meg. She was telling me what Elohim is. She was telling me it's some divine council under Michael. Was it Heiser's view that Fan likes? It's almost lesser gods that are on his council.
So it's kind of like the Galactic Federation or something.
The Avengers.
That seems like a pretty sick view. I might adopt it.
Yeah. So I mean, like, if what she's saying is true, and there's going to be like these other entities that are like godlike, but not exactly, like Yahweh, then you can only imagine what that's going to do to the theory. So
I prefer an infinite amount of postulates in my theories.
That's a thick theory.
Most philosophers will understand what you mean by possibility. Of course it's possible. Of course it's possible. As soon as you grant that, as soon as you say it's possible that every time some suffering occurs, it's because a demon is doing something. As long as you say it's possible, then great. You're not talking about a contradiction anymore. The argument is not about a contradiction. The argument is about evidence. And so that's why things turn in the evidential direction. But now that you're talking about the evidential direction, now you're talking about actual theodicies. What are some reasons that that suffering could occur? How do you, as an atheist?
Because the thing is that, this whole talk about the free will and possible worlds and shit like that. The thing is that Plantinga he defines omnipotence differently from the traditional way of, like, well, I guess maybe you do consider it the traditional way. I don't know, whatever, it doesn't matter. Typically omnipotence is being able to do that which is logically possible, right? That's typically how it's understood. However, Plantinga goes a little further than that and goes that no, there are other things that God can't actualize. There's a possible world that God can't actualize, and because they're metaphysically impossible. That's kind of like what the solution is. It's just, I said it earlier, something about transworld depravity and the nature of things. I don't know if you consider that a solution, or you just like. You just now, like, no longer talking about. I can hear myself. I don't know.
I don't know, but I wouldn't want to get into trying to defend any logical problem of evil here when Alex and Phil from the beginning have been bringing up an evidential problem. I mean, none of this it just doesn't seem very relevant.
Because he keeps saying this. I'm adding this because he keeps saying this, and this is important. I think. I don't know.
Gucci gang.
You say no, that's just stupid that God is allowing demons to do things in the world.
In an internal critique, what you're trying to do is find inconsistencies. You're not trying to argue that something is improbable, right? What you're trying to do as an internal critique is you're going inside this person's worldview, inside this person's own beliefs, and pointing out two different things that they hold that are inconsistent with each other. Like that's.
But that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. Internal critique could also be like a probabilistic one.
Yeah, like.
Right.
I gave Michael the example of the what is it? Fuck, what's the name of the argument again? Evolutionary debunking argument.
Oh, yeah.
Only one kind of critique, right?
I mean, suppose someone holds belief P and belief Q, and P predicts against Q, and now they have probabilistic tension in their worldview. That seems like an internal critique to me.
Yeah, it seems like the reliability of your cognitive faculties, given naturalism plus evolution, is very low. And that seems like an internal critique to the naturalist.
And the critique in question would be that you have your probabilities are not probabilitying, right?
It's true.
That's how internal critiques are supposed to work. But if they've got the
That's false.
Resources to explain suffering, you don't really have a response. It's no longer an internal critique. It's going to turn into some sort of external critique. I hate this thing.
I'm glad that it took them. I'm glad that it took them until 45 minutes and 6 seconds in to realize that Alex was giving an evidential problem of evil.
Yeah, well, it's not going to be like an external critique, because presumably like Alex is going to be used like probabilistic heuristics that his interlocutor already uses, and to shows that because of the propositions that make up the theory, it's going to be lower, given that there's like some probabilistic tension, right? He does not predict Q, like Andrew was saying previously.
When I say it took them this long to figure it out, I'm specifically referring to Mr. Cameron Bertuzzi. Continue the video.
He's a they, them now? I'm joking.
But yeah, so if you're going to be using someone's own worldview and they point to something like, you've got this free will theodicy, the fall and stuff, and this cosmic warfare that's going on, and this explains why there's suffering in the world, you no longer have an inconsistent worldview. You might just think that the worldview is like improbable relative to like what you believe, but it's no longer an internal critique. It's something else.
Or it might be improbable relative to what they believe if one of their beliefs predicts against another one of their beliefs.
Yeah.
But all right, go off, King.
This one, Alex is basically continuing his opening statement. Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, one more thing, just for people who are kind of new to this. Why, along the lines of why we have an issue with this being a supposed internal critique, or why we would think that there's a problem with saying that the God of the Bible wouldn't allow animal suffering or something like this, or the kinds of animal suffering. Guys, if you read, so here's the kind of issue. If you read the Bible from beginning to end and you said, okay, if this God exists, what are the chances that you're going to have human and animal suffering? 100%. Right? In other words, if you read the story of this God, if you read the story of the God of the Bible, you'd say, okay, what's the probability that this God is going to allow human and animal suffering? 100%. And so to say, oh, we've got human and animal suffering, that's a problem for the God of the Bible, there's something weird about that. Now, there are ways they could address that, but that's kind of like a sort of first step reaction.
Yeah, well, man, it gets worse than that, because, okay, on the biblical worldview, animal suffering, like literally probability 100% probability. If you want to ask, like, how likely is it that animal suffering exists?
I'm not sure why I would think that's the case. What the fuck? Where did that come from? Animal suffering.
Well, Rockstar, the animal suffering is described in the Bible. So, really, this is just this is probably just going to end up being something terminological. What is meant by biblical theism? Because I'm thinking that biblical theism just means a God exists that is omnibenevolent, omnipotent, omniscient, that the Hebrews worshipped, that the Christians worshipped. That's probably what I'm thinking. If you're just including something like and there's animal suffering into the hypothesis itself, I mean that's different, but I doubt that they're doing that.
All right, really quick. Listen, I love you guys. I gotta go. I'm just happy I was able to bring some aura to this panel. And yeah, you guys have fun, all right?
Love you, bro. Be safe.
Sounds good.
All right, broski. Love you
Peace.
too. Kisses.
Yeah. But I mean, I think if you bake in animal suffering into the hypothesis such that animal suffering on theism is 1, then that's not going to help you very much, because then we're going to ask, okay, given well, there's going to be this like internal tension. I mean, how likely is it that it's true that there's a hypothesis where there's a God that is both against animal suffering and commands animal suffering? You really all you've done is you've pushed you've pushed it back one step. I think not articulating that the best way, but
yeah, there's also going to be some tension when there's going to be some content that like predicts animal suffering, and then I guess like prima facie some content in the theory that predicts against animal suffering, and you're going to have some tension there too. Yeah, I don't know if you guys,
because if what they're saying was right, you could sort of escape any probabilistic attack on any of your theories by baking the evidence point against your theory into the content of the theory. Well, fine-tuning isn't evidence against atheism because my hypothesis of atheism includes the fact that there is a not fine-tuned universe that no God inhabits, and so the probability of there being fine-tuning on my atheist hypothesis is 1. It's 100% expected.
Yeah, but then what happens to the priors then, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
If Christianity is true, 100%, and then ask the question: okay, suppose atheism is true. What's the probability that we see animal suffering? That there's a universe, like David outlined earlier. There's a universe. There's a light. The universe is life permitting.
As close to zero as you can possibly be without being zero.
Yeah,
that's what I would say.
exactly. So
you have to say atheism plus all these brute facts plus this plus this plus this. Yeah.
Yeah, and it turns into, I mean, atheism.
The irony is like a little palpable here.
I don't know if you have to. I guess if you want to predict, if you want your theory to predict it,
well, okay, so
if you want your theory to, go ahead.
Both theories are gonna accept natural. What is it? Naturalism? Not naturalism. I'm sorry. Evolution, at the very least.
Well, I was gonna say that if you know, Then's probably right that if you want your hypothesis to predict all these data points as strongly as their version of theism is, you have to add some auxiliaries. But what that doesn't mean is that atheism without adding the auxiliaries is less probable than their version of theism, even taking that evidence into consideration, because we're ignoring a huge piece of the puzzle here, which is the priors.
That's what I've been saying. All right.
Theists have a very serious problem. They want to couch it as like, oh man, this is such a problem for theists, but actually it's a much bigger problem.
Yeah, I feel like they're calling for 1982 or something.
What? What'd you say?
I feel like they're arguing from 1982, but I mean, was Alex even born then? I don't think he was.
No. No, he was probably born in like 2009.
How old is he?
What is this? What's going on here?
I can't do quick math. He'd be like 15 years old right now.
Yeah, I'm guessing he's early 20s.
Yeah, no, I think he's like 23 or 24. All right, let's finally get to this clip I've been trying to set up for like the past 30 minutes. All right, in this one he argues, why does where you're born predict whether you're saved? All right, so he kind of moves on to like a different man, what's a good term for this, Stan? I call it like a geographical type objection.
What's up?
I don't know if we care about this one. I saw part of this part of the conversation.
This one is where Alex is giving some. He's saying that the distribution of people that accept various religions is more expected given atheism over theism. That's what Alex is trying to argue for, but I don't know if we care that much about that.
I gotcha. We can skip it if you guys don't want them to talk about it.
We can see what the next thing is.
Do you know where's the next?
Probably here, maybe.
Probably
once
like
they take that window off, yeah.
Yeah, right here.
At all, protein by chance, anywhere in the universe. You're still not getting one medium-length protein. You need hundreds of them for the simplest imaginable life that we can come up with. So don't just say, "Oh, it's a big universe." You have no idea with how improbable something like life is. According to Alex, you would just expect it. No, I wouldn't. The point is, I wouldn't expect it. And if you did get life, then what would I expect? I don't know, bacteria or something like that. Am I expecting it to get to a level where you have human beings reflecting on this? Now you have human consciousness and so on. Am I expecting you to get to this level? And then if you do get to this level, am I expecting you to be aware of more objective moral laws and so on? Am I going to expect you to be aware of logical laws and to even come up with a concept of theism? Even that, people don't understand. Years ago, I did a paper at EPS called the Bayesian ontological argument, and I was just, okay, if you start off with theism and say, what's the probability that we would come up with an idea for God? Which does that favor? If you had start off with atheism, what's the probability that we would come up with a concept of God? I said it's massively.
I bet he didn't take the priors into consideration.
vastly more probable on theism than it is on atheism. You'd even come up with a concept of God. Where are you getting a concept of some all-knowing, all-knowing, all-powerful, perfectly good being? It doesn't correspond to anything in your senses. Why are you developing a concept of it? So anyway, the point is, there's nothing in what Alex is doing. If you take everything that Alex is even arguing, saying, "Oh, it's expected."
So the problem I have is like a lot of times in like probabilistic assessments, if you want something to predict something, the probability of it being 100% on a given theory, most of the time what's going to happen is like you're going to have to add a lot of specificity to the theory in order to generate that 100% probability. So if he wants to say that this sort of phenomenon is predicted by theism, or his flavor of theism, by 100%, then more than likely his theory is going to get extremely specified in order to predict that data. And as we know, like the more specificity, the more specific the theory is, then you know what happens to the probability of it. But yeah, that's all.
There's nothing in his worldview. There's nothing in anything he's saying where I say it's more expected on atheism than it is on.
It's like we have to stop. Like anyone can generate any fucking theory that predicts something with like a probability of 100%. But what the fuck does that do to the theory overall? Like what happens with the priors? Like we have to stop ignoring that. It's like, who cares if we can construct something that predicts something with 100% probability? There's like a huge fucking element that you're just completely glazing over. Ugh.
On theism, nothing. And there are all kinds of things that are like presupposed in there that if you said, I'm starting with theism or I'm starting with atheism, which makes this evidence more probable? Theism wins every single time. And somehow, again, you're saying, now let's take the big jumbled thing and put it all together. All these individual things, dozens of them, that massively support theism over atheism. Let's say if you put the whole big ball together, it points to atheism and it's exactly what we would expect. Okay, I can't take you seriously anymore.
I don't see why that's something that is so incredulous, like why he's acting so incredulous towards that. Suppose that you do have all these things that strongly predict theism for a second, and then after you've baked in all those things that strongly favor theism, you have something that strongly favors atheism. It's not out of the question or impossible that it can probabilistically support atheism so strongly that it outweighs the other things that support theism. I'm not saying that that's the case here. It might not be the case here. It plausibly isn't the case. But the point is that when you're trying to, I think it's called what, the law of total evidence or something, or there's something in philosophy of statistics where when you evaluate how likely a hypothesis is, you're supposed to take all of the evidence into consideration. So what he's describing and saying, if someone was to say this, I wouldn't be able to take you seriously anymore. That's just something that can happen. Sometimes you can conditionalize on a whole bunch of things that strongly favor one hypothesis, and then the last thing you conditionalize on favors the other one so strongly that overall the latter is the one that's more likely.
That's right.
Yep. Oh, one thing I wanted to do is actually show you guys.
Is it the law of total probability? Is that what you're thinking of?
It's a geographical distribution map of the world religions. This is pretty interesting. This is pretty interesting. Okay, so this is Buddhism. As you can see, seems pretty centrally located.
This isn't that interesting.
Right?
Should skip to something else.
We've got China's got some.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think it is the law of total probability because you're going to do the summation of all. So you're going to take, not to, get too into it, but like what you need to do is take all of the evidence consideration. So the probability of this theory, given this data point, given that data point, given that data point, given that data point. I think it is called the law of total.
No, I don't think it's. I don't think it's what you just said. I think it's called the requirement of total evidence. Is what I'm thinking of.
Oh, okay. Well, actually, I think I'm actually just reciting base term. Actually, now I'm thinking about it. That's just base term. Never mind.
Mongolia, but mainly in this area over here. right? Let's now switch to Islam.
Do we need to see the map of where all the world religions are?
Okay.
Yeah,
so
we do. This
still
is very
pretty
integral.
centrally located in this area. Islamic yeah. Sunday to
and around, judge say the gospel, but you do not hear it in any serious reform or something like that. How is God going to judge them and so on? And Alex knows by this point that there are responses to those kinds of things. So this is weird.
Yeah. I'm sure Alex. The next clip.
This one's about.
I suppose Alex does know that. I suppose Alex does know their responses to what he's saying. Well, I mean, if his interlocutors didn't bring up the responses, then why would he spend precious time in a time debate responding to points that his interlocutors did not bring up? I don't understand why you would expect that of him.
That's so weird. I don't get that. And then tried to characterize him as like a dishonest or like bad person for not doing so. That's, what are you doing?
Opening statement. And this one contains, I think, probably the most embarrassing line in the debate.
Is true of animal suffering. What would we expect to see if the world was being supervised by benevolence itself? And what do we find? Natural selection is the mechanism of animal development, which does not just involve, but relies upon death and destruction to the extent that 99.9% of the species, let alone the individual creatures that have ever existed on this planet, have been brutally wiped from existence in some of the most painful ways imaginable. Survival of the fittest is the same thing as death and anguish and suffering of the unfit. I think this is at least unexpected. If we assume naturalism, however, the world is just an amoral arena of accidentally existing organisms fighting in a blind struggle for survival in a world of limited resources. Again, we do not just explain the reality of the world, we also come to expect it.
Okay, so that's not the part that I'm talking about that's embarrassing, but we've already addressed that, right? We don't necessarily need to go over it again. We might
and you failed.
do it at some point. But this next line is what I'm talking about. Again, the topic of the...
Oh, no, I just wanted to point out, like, the only, there's something he's saying that is correct there. He's mostly massively incorrect in terms of expectations. I do like that he's arguing kind of a Bayesian fashion. Hey, you take this hypothesis, what would you expect? Pretend you didn't know anything. Pretend you didn't know anything. This is the approach, guys. Pretend you didn't know what you knew, and all you knew is the hypothesis. What would you expect on that hypothesis? What would you expect? And so you take a hypothesis like naturalism, you take a hypothesis like theism and say, what would you expect? And then you open your eyes and say, looking around you, which hypothesis matched up with your expectations best? And you'd say the evidence favors that one over the alternative. What he's saying is, hey, if you just start with naturalism, then all this becomes absolute nonsense. But in his defense,
I'm not convinced that Alex is saying that. I think I could be wrong.
I was going to say, it's not to interrupt, but I think Alex might be saying it's not a surprise that we see this thing given naturalism or atheism.
Right. I think what he really means is it's like more surprising to find that on theism, and it's not that surprising to find it on atheism. I feel like if you asked Alex, is this what you meant here? He would say, yeah, but
yeah.
It's just my interpretation.
What you'd say is, if you already granted a universe.
Do you want to say something, Freddie? I thought I saw you.
No, I'm good.
Okay.
First, and if you already granted that it's finely tuned, and if you granted life, and if you granted the big evolutionary picture of how life and all its diversity arose, and if you granted all of this, and then you said, okay, what about animal suffering? Which hypothesis does this fit better, or something like this? Then you'd say, okay, and here's why, ladies and gentlemen, here's why. And Draper argued this. If naturalism is true, and we somehow got to the world we see around us, there's kind of only one game for how you got here, right? You need to start off with something simple that forms by accident, and then it needs to be able to evolve and somehow get to us. In other words, the evolutionary picture is kind of the only game in town on naturalism for how you could get to this. Whereas, if you started with God, could God do the same thing? Could God use evolution? And so, of course he could. But God would also have a bunch of other ways that he could make life. So God would have a lot of different possible ways of creating a world where you have living things. There's only one way to go about it on naturalism. And so you could say, wait a minute, God could have done it in all these different ways. Why did he do it in the one way that you could get it in naturalism? And so it looks like this favors naturalism. But again, that's if you granted every single step all the way down to life and so on. And I just wouldn't. I would never grant that all those individual things favor naturalism over theism.
What would he deny? I'm so curious. What would he deny?
Well, what would he deny? What I'm not getting is, it sounds like his response would be, I would just question whether the things held in the background are more expected on theism than atheism, but that's just not to interact with the argument. That's just to interact with something other than the argument. I mean,
but
sure, you can,
like,
I guess you can change the subject if you want, or you can grant that evolutionary suffering is less expected on theism than atheism, and then say, well, there are these other data points, and so when you take all the evidence into consideration, theism still wins out. That's fine. But just saying there's these other data points that favor theism, and you're holding some of these data points in the background, isn't to reply to the argument that evolutionary suffering favors atheism over theism. It just doesn't reply to it.
Right. Because the data that's being conditionalized on is evolutionary suffering.
Right.
Anything else is just tangential.
And animal suffering overall. Yeah.
Well, here he was still manning Draper's evolutionary suffering argument.
That the totality does, because it just doesn't. They don't. These things don't fit. In fact, Draper even had a paper where he argued that human and animal suffering is a parallel problem to cosmic fine-tuning. He said naturalism and theism both each have a problem. Namely, if you started with naturalism, would you be seriously surprised by the universe being finely tuned for life? He says, well, yeah, that's not surprising at all in theism. It's massively surprising on naturalism. So that's a problem with naturalism. And then he argues that theism, if you had theism, would you expect all the kinds of human and animal suffering we see around us? No, you wouldn't. And therefore, it's evidence favoring naturalism. So he basically says, be an agnostic at the end of it. You have a serious problem with either one. So until you come up with some great tiebreaker, be agnostic about it.
So I think there's actually an argument from fine-tuning, the fine-tuning of actually evil and suffering for the truth of Christianity. All right, let me explain how it goes. It's actually not that difficult. So it just goes like this. On naturalism, on the picture that Alex was outlining, there's still some variability in how much suffering there would be in the world. Right. So there could be a lot less suffering. There could be the amount of suffering that we see in the world, but there also could be a whole lot more suffering. So why would we expect this amount of suffering, particularly in which there can be soul building? There can be the type of soul building where, you know, if there was too much suffering in the world, we couldn't really cultivate the virtues, the same types of virtues. Like we wouldn't really be able to express forgiveness if we're just constantly being bombarded with, suffering the whole time. Like we wouldn't really be able to cultivate our character in the same sort of way. And so that's all consistent with naturalism. You could have a lot less suffering. You could have the amount of suffering that we see in the world, that we currently see in the world, or you could have a lot more suffering, right? And so how do you get the prediction that we have the amount of suffering that we see in the world that just so happens to be the right amount to where we can cultivate these sorts of virtues, like soul building?
I don't like that. That's a little...
I wouldn't grant that there's the right amount of suffering to cultivate these virtues.
That just so happens.
I know what he's sort of gesturing towards here. There's a point that I think Trent Doherty made where there's like, consider that there's possible worlds with varying degrees of suffering. So here's 9 degrees: 1, too infrequent and too mild; 2, too frequent and right intensity; 3, too frequent and too intense; 4, right frequency and too mild; 5, right frequency and right intensity; 6, right frequency and too intense; 7, too infrequent and too mild; 8, too infrequent and right intensity; and 9, too infrequent and too intense. And then what he wants to say is we're in a level 5 world, right intensity and right frequency. And I don't see strong reasons to think that. I think probably to show that would require some like massive empirical project. I don't think anybody has done.
Yeah, it doesn't seem that like when the fawn gets dies after slow agonizing death under a burning tree or something like that. That doesn't seem like the right type of frequency or right time of what was the other one? Number 5? Right type of frequency, right type of whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I just don't see how that's like going to be tethered to those sorts of virtues that he desires, like forgiveness or like like bravery or courage when you have to overcome like your fear. Like presumably there's going to be the kinds of suffering and evils that are like not conducive to those sorts of things. So to say that we have the right amounts of suffering or evil or whatever this is conditionalized on, so we can get those sorts of virtues, like I think it's very implausible.
Plus, because does he think that in order to, because when he says like the amount is like I guess he's saying like the suffering could be in varying degrees. I guess it could go up, it could go down, but I guess as you said, like Trent Doherty has like the right amount, that perfect middle line where it's like the perfect right amount, does this extend throughout all of evolutionary history?
Presumably, this is applying to the world, the possible world as a whole.
Yeah, that is
strange. What?
Yeah, it is weird, but yeah.
When it points out, right? The soul building at least points to these different virtues: courage and forgiveness and sacrifice and so on.
Ooh, called it.
So this actually, I think the specific amount of suffering that we see in the world is actually better predicted on theism than it is on naturalism, even if we grant them all these things in the world. What are your thoughts on that argument, David?
Wait, hold on.
Yeah, I think you could argue that.
Isn't it only if it's the right, if what we have is the right amount, right? Is conducive to all those virtues. But why would some non-theist accept that?
This kind of reminds me of a point Oppie made, where this isn't exactly relevant to the probabilistic argument. He's putting this forward in more abductive context, but I think the essence of the response is still relevant here, which is that when you're looking at some event or some data point and you're trying to see which hypothesis it better fits with, or which hypothesis out of two better accommodates it, it needs to be a data point that both groups of people agree on.
Yeah.
If the data point is that there's a level 5 world, as Doherty would put it, I just don't see that as a data point that the atheist is agreeing with.
Yeah,
right. Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
Oh, if you just have guys, if you just had naturalism, I mean, why not far more suffering? Why not serious? Yeah. Why not serious, endless bloodbath?
Or again, why anything at all?
Oh yeah, if you're factoring that in, yeah, I'm trying, guys. I'm actually trying to be as favorable as possible. When you're talking about like universe forming, finely tuned universe, and so on, like these things, they so massively favor theism over naturalism. They're not even in the same ballpark. Not even in the same ballpark. You don't.
They just so massively favor it, but like, no, don't look at the priors. 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 Just look how much they better predict.
Theism is playing big league baseball, and atheism is playing in the little leagues, Ruckster. That's all 11-year-olds doing atheism.
No. He's like, here's the data that's predicted. What's that over there? No, those are just the priors. Don't look at that. Don't look at that. That's irrelevant. No. You don't want to see that.
Don't even have symbols, because people will use they'll use the greater than sign to just, it's more probable on this hypothesis than another, and then they'll add an exclamation point. It's like you would need to add like 100 exclamation points if you actually wanted to picture how much these things favor theism over naturalism. But it's like, yeah, and so granting everything, you could say, okay, well, since this is the only game in town for naturalism, and it kind of fits or something like that. But going along with what Cameron's pointing out, well, if life did develop naturally, and we granted you that, and you started getting organisms, since
you can just conditionalize on a bunch of data points, but like they tend to have an inverse relationship. So the more it predicts, the more it predicts, the more specificity. I meant inverse in terms of the priors. And so, I mean, if that happens, you can just say all these things are like very, very, very specifically predicted by theism. Dude, you just don't understand how thick and juicy your theory becomes. And I don't make thick and juicy in a good way.
See, in organisms, why not far more? Why not far more? Why is the amount of suffering in our world just the right amount for us to live and flourish, and yet have enough problems and so
I don't accept that.
Why would anybody think that? The suffering that occurred on the Holocaust is just the right amount.
Like if it was like one less person, then we wouldn't get all the virtues that we desire, and all the courage and all that stuff that we like.
That child that got, we're not on TikTok, but that child across the street that got bleeped or whatever. Yeah, that's just the right amount to
so good
for moral character.
So good.
It's just like, what?
Oh, yes. A soul building.
on, where we can develop virtues and have free will and things like that.
All right, we probably should finish this clip that I said is one of the most embarrassing from the debate. I want to remind the audience really quickly, the debate that they were talking about, like the topic of the debate is whether or not the biblical God exists, and this is where he sort of summarizes his whole thoughts. Right, this is the very end of his opening statement. So let's listen to this.
So, an unreliable source pointing to a fragmented God who, despite being the essence of benevolence, designs and consistently oversees systems of untold suffering and sometimes commands its infliction directly himself. The very moral intuition that Cliffe and Stuart are relying upon to make a case for God's existence. Well, you know that certain things are right or wrong. You know that's not just a matter of opinion. Are the very moral intuitions that we're invited to discard with when faced with basically anything that the God of the Old Testament does. Does the biblical God exist? I don't even know what biblical God we're talking about. Which one?
Boy,
that's how he ends it. Which biblical God are we talking about?
Yeah, so it's just interesting to me because Christians typically are the ones that get called out for cherry picking the Bible. And it seems like Alex's rhetorical point here rests upon one, I think, just bad readings of various places in the Bible. And then just hyper focusing on those to say like, hey, there's a huge distinction between what you see of the God of the Old Testament and the God in the New Testament. And that's like the rhetorical point he's trying to make here. And Alex knows the arguments. He knows the scholarship on a lot of these things. He's read the Bible. He knows.
I think what Alex is trying to say is that, like, presumably God instills us these sorts of like moral faculties or moral intuitions, and it seems that there seems to be like some kind of like incommensurability with those faculties and the kinds of things he did in the Old Testament. Now, I don't know if there's like an interpretation of those events that transpired in the Old Testament where God didn't kill like all those people or kill like, you know, all of the firstborn kids, like what was it when the Jews were enslaved by the like the Egyptians or whatever. I mean, I don't know too much about the Bible stuff, so forgive me everybody if I'm ignorant on this. Like, I think Alex is just saying that like God gives us these moral intuitions. They seem to be at odds with what God has done in the Old Testament. I think that's kind of a fair thing to say. I don't know.
Is that he should know there's like I think it's a 6-to-1 ratio that scholars point out when the Old Testament talks about God's characters. Is this
guys, try not to skip and listen to me. Please do everything you can to help me.
I'm sorry, I can't help you.
Don't skip, Buckster. Don't skip. You have to not skip.
And mercy and love in relation to his punishment.
Jesus.
Like Alex should know this stuff. So I'm really miffed about that.
Well,
hey, wait, hold on.
Oh,
fuck, never mind. I was gonna make a joke, but never mind.
You can make the joke if you want.
No, I was gonna say, did the suffering that you just caused for that poor woman, did it like contribute to her soul building?
All right, you're done. You're done, buddy. Kicked off the stream.
Get out of here. No.
All right. What were you gonna say, Rockstar?
I was gonna say it's also fair for Alex to say which biblical God are you talking about? Because presumably, like depending upon the interpretations of Scripture, you can have like radically different notions of the biblical God. So I think that's also kind of fair to say. Even if I'm
not sure if he was he asking that genuinely or was he asking it rhetorically though?
Oh, I mean, in case he was asking it genuinely. All right. In case.
I didn't catch because I didn't catch the context. I don't know how he was asking it, but I don't know.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that clip, David? Otherwise, we'll skip forward and actually get some of the back and forth between Cliffe. And
okay, let's skip forward.
What did he say there? We
already yapped enough on this stuff.
You guys want to go to the back and forth?
I think that's what they're doing now, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's get to that. I'll take forever to get there. Oh, buffering.
Why can't that be conjoined to Christianity in order to explain animal suffering? That seems a little bit odd, but that's
say if you're watching Inspiring Philosophies in this, but what would that have to? I'm wondering to the Peter.
That's basically forgeries or interpolations in the text.
Yeah, that's all. There's all clip.
Mark chapter 7, the end of 7, and the first 11 verses of John 8. There is serious question due to the fact those passages are not found in the earliest Greek manuscripts that we have, whether those additions or not. Now, Alex, please answer the question. What is more reasonable than the God of the New Testament? Who or what do you put your faith in that is based on more evidence of reliability?
So earlier in his opening statement, Cliffe his basic argument was that he's had his own share of doubts, and that he basically thinks that Christian theism is the most reasonable worldview compared to the other worldviews, the other worldview options that are out there. Not an unreasonable thing to argue, right? We've been talking about that pretty much this entire time, that if you come from the perspective of an atheist and your worldview is atheism, there is no God, what would you actually expect to see in the world if that was your hypothesis, if that was your worldview? And Cliffe is asking Alex explicitly, why is your worldview more likely than mine?
Mm-hmm. And by the way, that is important little.
Is that what he's asking?
This is one of the most important ideas for atheists to get, because what you've seen, especially since the rise of the new atheism, is, hey, prove that your God exists, and I'm going to sit back and play skeptic.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you can play
but
skeptic.
Alex
If I didn't want to believe that Alex
atheist,
O'Connor exists, could I come up with all?
You said what?
Alex isn't an atheist.
He's an agnostic, so like this is all just.
I know the whole little writing atheist right underneath their name is kind of weird.
Alternatives. Yeah, aliens are tricking me. Maybe I'm dreaming. Maybe I just imagine it. Maybe there's a guy going around pretending to be Alex O'Connor, and there is no real Alex. You could come up with all sorts of explanations if you wanted to play skeptic. So that is not a good criterion for.
I don't see why that's true.
Oh.
Just because you're skeptical about some hypothesis doesn't mean that you think it could just easily be, or just because you're skeptical about just because you're skeptical about one thing doesn't mean you're skeptical about everything else.
Right.
You can also think that one hypothesis is false without thinking that the alternatives are. That you can think that other alternatives are false. It's aliens. That's false. I mean, I just don't see.
Ask, oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I just don't really understand this response from what is his name, David?
I think so. Yeah, you could also ask why is it the case that the particular person in question is skeptical about the existence of that particular God, because it can be a thing of probability. Right, and if that's the case, then what you can't infer from that is that they're systematically skeptical about everything in existence.
It seems like maybe what he's saying is, if they answer "I don't know" to God to the question of what created the universe or something like that, that saying "I don't know" means you think it could just be anything. The explanation could just be anything, but obviously that's not what it means to say that you don't know.
Yeah. Maybe you have some contenders in mind, and you've eliminated some possibilities. Maybe you think they're extremely implausible, such that you don't even find them to be contenders in the first place. And then the ones that are remaining, you don't know which one out of those ones.
I think this happens all the time in everyday belief formation. I'm agnostic on which factors cause autism. I know that vaccines don't cause it, though.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, can I be skeptical about it? Of course, you could be skeptical about all kinds of things. In fact, you could dial up your skepticism for any worldview high enough to where you would think that worldview is just complete nonsense. That's very different from saying, what is the best worldview? What worldview accounts for the evidence the best?
I don't think dialing up your skepticism would lead to you thinking a worldview is nonsense, though. Yeah. It just has to do with whether or not you believe in it or not. Whether you think it's stupid or silly or something, that's a whole different thing.
Or if you're talking about an individual argument, what is or an individual piece of evidence, saying, okay, what is the best explanation for this piece of evidence? That's very different kinds of reasoning. Because think, if you wanted to say, if an atheist says, prove to me that God exists, and you give a cosmological argument or something like this, can an atheist reject a premise? Can he reject the claim that the universe began to exist? Yeah. Can he reject the claim that if something begins to exist, it must have a cause? Can he reject those things? Of course you can. You can raise your skepticism level up enough to say, I reject your premise. You can't prove it to me. What's the best explanation for getting a universe? If you're just comparing theism and atheism, well, one has a cause, the other has no cause. So one of those would win, and the other would lose. And so when you go down the line,
atheism says no cause. All right.
Yeah, that's not
If you
atheism. Yeah, I thought atheism was about a god or something.
No, Rockstar. Atheism is the universe has no cause.
Oh, okay. So, okay. I didn't know that. Damn. You learn something new every day.
Okay, we know you can be skeptical here, but what's a better explanation for life? Being created or not? What's the best and then you get to where, what's the best explanation for all of it? I mean, I completely understand where Cliffe would be coming from right now, saying, no, even if you want to reject it, even if you want to point this or that out, even if you want to say, this makes no sense to me here, okay, who has a better explanation for the way things are? I say I do. I say you literally cannot explain anything. You literally.
But just be careful, because just because you can explain all of the data doesn't mean your theory is more likely. Please, you have to take that into consideration, because a lot of times theories that tend to have a lot of explanatory power for specific data, they tend to suffer when it comes to the priors. So stop just caring about. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
My theory is just the collection of all the data points that we examine.
Right. Like you have a proposition for each data point.
And it's just the conjunction of all of them.
It is a conjunction of all that. Yeah, it perfectly explains all the data. If that's the only metric we're going by, your worldview is probably the best one. All right.
I will add one more thing, just because we're on this. Probably we're just talking about simplicity right now. So there's two. They're technically there are three, but the two important ones that I want to note here is there's also qualitative and quantitative simplicity, and this is going to affect your prior probability. So let's say presumably if we have Alex here and then we have Cliffe here, they both, suppose they both accept naturalism. Presumably Cliffe is going to be accepting more, excuse me, qualitative, cost, right? Because presumably if we keep things the same on both sides, Alex and Cliffe both accept natural facts, but Cliffe goes a step forward. There are such things as non-natural facts, like a deity or something like that. You have a different kind of thing in your ontology, and that's just gonna. So it's not. Take that by contrast to quantitative simplicity, which is just about the amount of entities you have in a theory. Yeah. And my headphones are dying. Give me a second.
Gucci gang.
Literally have no explanation for a rock, and you're complaining about my worldview.
Yep. And we'll also see that Alex doesn't even defend atheism in this this video. He defends agnosticism, or at least attempts to.
Why does that matter? Sorry. What's the debate proposition again?
Is biblical theism true?
Well, who gives a fuck if he doesn't defend atheism?
Right.
Presumably those two views aren't mutually, they don't exhaust the logical possibilities.
As long as you successfully rule out biblical theism, you're golden. You don't need to affirm an alternative or competing hypothesis. You don't need to do anything like that. All you have to do is just show that there's good reasons to reject biblical theism. Maybe at the end of that, you go and accept some other kind of theism. I don't know.
As opposed to what Cliffe is arguing, that agnosticism is practically impossible. But let's continue this clip here.
We're getting to this point of reliability, because I don't want to just change the subject here. But you didn't answer my question.
Alex, you asked a lot of questions. Now, could you please?
Yeah, but you didn't answer my question. Do you believe that they were late traditions or not?
I don't know, but there's solid evidence that those were possibly additions. I don't know.
Okay. In which case, because we have to follow the thread of the argument here, otherwise it's a useless endeavor. If we have good evidence to suggest that people were adding stories into the gospel manuscripts even after they were first published, do we not have good reason to therefore think that people could also add stories to these manuscripts before they were written? In other words,
oh my goodness.
Yeah.
It was, as I said.
I'm sure you already know that.
What are your thoughts on that, guys?
I don't care so much about the biblical scholarship stuff. I'm just waiting to see if they
I said the
talk more
same thing,
about
but I was muted. I said I don't care.
All right.
Issues there, David, but
that's pretty terrible.
Dan, let's get your thoughts.
Smuggled in there.
Go ahead.
Oh, all he's smuggling in there is his hypothesis that this was a later tradition that was made up and not original to Mark.
Mm-hmm.
But the debate is what the actual ending of Mark was at the time, and what the purpose of that abrupt ending is. If that was there's so many different debates here. Alex's hypothesis that this is just a legendary edition is just one of the many hypotheses. And the question of is this ending original or not is not identical to the question of is this short or long ending a legendary edition that's made up. Like there's so much conflation happening here, and he's smuggling things into his questioning that maybe Cliffe is just not aware of, and that comes off to me almost a little predatory.
Rare.
Yeah. So you're saying
if he's not aware of it, if he's lacking in terms of like, I don't know, like biblical knowledge in order to address these questions adequately, maybe you should blame Cliffe and on Alex. All right, that just sounds like a skill issue.
He's a predator. No.
Don't know what you mean by that. I don't like the implication.
Alex touched me. I'm gonna reveal this to you guys now on stream. Sorry, I haven't brought this up before.
No.
I think he's
right,
calling Alex a predator because of the problem of animal suffering. So,
oh damn! Hold on. Give me. Never mind. I was gonna do a bit. Forget it. Let's get back to it. I was gonna find like a doll or something and just ask you where he touched you on the doll.
What's wrong with you? Yeah, so there you're right. There are multiple problems here, guys. When
he kind of did with his mustache, to be honest.
When it gets pointed out, oh yeah, that's messed up. You guys are live streaming my own. Man.
He shaved it. No, look,
do I need to shave my mustache now? Dang.
No, dude, we all have mustache. He shaved. No, he shaved his. Now he's back to like the beard, so he's looking less predatorish these days.
I have to say I like him. I like him. No mustache better. It's kind of. It can catch people off guard because it's I'm just a kid. Look at me, I'm just a kid. And then you like blast them with your intellect and so on. So anyway, it's to his advantage to look like
blast them with the intellect. That's not what he's blasting them with.
Oh Lord! Listen, if Cameron, I doubt it, but if Cameron, Dan, and David again decide to review this is crazy. They gotta have to bleep a lot of stuff in here.
Yeah, bro's getting demonetized. Look, all I'm just saying is like, I can make fun of how homeboy looks, but y'all don't look like y'all are getting bitches either. That's all I'm saying.
Kid, but yeah, guys, everyone was watching.
What do you mean?
When you hear,
what are you talking about, Rockstar? Do you not see the way that Cameron is dressed? That is.
You're right.
Look. Look at the shirt.
No, you're right. And the glasses, he got like the Superman thing going on, but not quite. No, I see what you mean. I see.
You have early manuscripts that do not include, let's say, those first 11 verses of chapter 8 of the Gospel of John. The claim is not that someone made up the story. You could think that, but the claim is not that someone made up the story. The claim is just that maybe that wasn't in the original Gospel of John. So the claim is not that someone made up a story, they fabricated a story. The claim is that, matter of fact, it would be more likely either that there were multiple editions of the Gospel of John, or that people are like, wait a minute, how are people leaving out this story of what happened with the woman caught in adultery? How is no one including this?
We need authentic oral tradition.
Yeah, and matter of fact, there's even a manuscript where someone inserted it into the Gospel.
Authentic oral tradition.
Inserted it into the Gospel.
So
it's getting a little steamy in here.
I mean, the Gospel of John acknowledges at the end that Jesus said and did all kinds of other things. And so the idea would be that someone's like, oh, you can't leave this out. You can't leave this out. Or that there were multiple early editions of the Gospel of John and so on. But so that's one issue. It's not saying, the theory is not that someone lied about this and made up a story and I'm going to fabricate this story. The story is that you have some manuscripts that have it, some manuscripts that don't. What's the explanation? What's the explanation for why some have it and some don't? So it's not a claim about making something up. Apart from that, the idea, I mean, again, the issue of different manuscripts and so on. The Gospels are written in the 1st century, and they spread very, very quickly. They're being spread as separate books.
We need to find wherever they start playing the video again.
Yeah, bro.
I literally, I
Too
was
much
other manuscript, multiple entries, here, script, a lot of actually in.
Top problems.
Oh, here we go.
We're going to get to those numbers up a little bit after we watch some more of this clip here.
But there are all kinds of things that end up in the gospel manuscripts that did not actually happen and weren't in the earliest traditions.
Historically, that would make zero sense.
Do we care about the Bible stuff
and how close the events themselves were.
I want to get to the part where Cliffe is like screaming at Alex about being an agnostic. That's the part I want to get to.
Okay. Is it this?
Do you know the general timestamp for that?
No, because I didn't watch this review all the way. I only watched the original debate between Cliffe and Alex.
Okay, hold on.
Well, let me
Ay, coño.
There's DIY, and there's doing it yourself.
Yeah.
And you're saying maybe chemists help us actually figure this.
Yep. Look at Frosty.
Do you think that Jesus is the only person who's ever risen from the dead?
No, Jesus raised people from the dead.
Outside of the people that Jesus rose from the dead and the apostles and the Old Testament prophets rose from the dead.
Totally possible that they're.
David, you know where he's going?
I would guess
like
he's
the
going
most tired.
I'm guessing he's going in the Bayesian direction of extremely low prior probability, given like almost a.
I wish,
No.
David. I wish he'd go
worse.
there, but he's not.
It's much worse.
Oh,
There
really?
is some type of near-death experience or some
No,
type.
I mean like physical bodily resurrection of the
I
dead.
am not intelligent enough to follow all of the claims, but the resurrection of Christ, I think, is historically validated and a very intellectually satisfying.
I mean, not to throw shots, but he could have stopped that sentence at "I'm not intelligent enough."
Manner.
So here's a question. In Matthew chapter 27, we're told that there's an earthquake, the second earthquake of Matthew, neither of which we have any other reports of, but there's an earthquake, and the graves open, and the holy ones of Jerusalem exit their graves and walk around the city of Jerusalem, appearing to many. Do you think that happened?
Yes, I do think that happened. Now, Alex, it's time for you to answer my question. What is the alternative to the biblical God, Jesus Christ, that you accept as more reliable?
You say something?
Go ahead. No, I thought you're roughly on the right area.
Cliff is asking him, can you repeat it or back it up just like 5 seconds so we can hear the whole question?
Yeah, go ahead. I'm saying go ahead. Yeah, I will.
Many. Do you think that happened?
Yes, I do think that happened. Now, Alex, it's time for you to answer my question. What is the alternative to the biblical God, Jesus Christ, that you accept as more reliable? And secondly, what's the evidence that that alternative to Christ is really reliable?
I'm an agnostic. I don't submit to know what the ultimate answers to human existence are, but I don't think that the evidence for Christianity being the correct one is plausible.
So give me the more plausible one. That was my question, Alex. What's the more plausible one that you have chosen to follow? Because obviously you're dressed a certain way. Obviously you have your hair on your face manicured very nicely. So obviously you have motives. You have ambition.
Is he hitting on him?
So you're looking for something or someone.
Should we be here? Should we let them go and do their thing? Like,
What is it, and what's the evidence that what you are living for is reliable?
It's the Cliff for being progressive. I mean, I know there's a lot of homophobia surrounding Christianity, but it's the hitting on Alex on.
Well, I know you're living for something. I see the way that you're dressed, and the way that your hair smells, and the way that my heart flutters a little bit when I'm standing beside you, and
the way that after you come out the shower wet and one droplet goes down your nose and all the way down your chest, and I see you.
So what are you living for?
Sorry, what were we talking about again?
I'm afraid I kind of just reject the grammar of the question. I don't have a systematized theology because I don't even believe in the existence of God. I'm an agnostic. Like I say, I don't know the answer to these questions. I don't know.
Like, did he just not inform him? Like, well, it says atheist like on his. You see this?
Why is that a cop out?
It's not even just that, right? Like,
let's let Than finish his.
Yeah. Okay.
Cliff is asked. I don't know if Cliff is doing this, but
wait, hang on. So he's an agnostic, not an atheist?
Apparently,
I really don't know.
Okay, that's interesting.
That's what he said.
Right. He said he's agnostic about. He said he's agnostic about the question of or ultimate origins or something.
Yeah,
that's what he said. Yeah, let's continue.
That agnosticism is a superior position to atheism, but I thought he was an atheist.
Well, because Cliff's on the right track if he's doing what I think he's doing, right? Because Cliff presumably is coming from this position saying, like, look, Christianity, like, if I just grant the thing you just said, Alex, I still think on total evidence, Christianity is the best explanation of the reality we live in. If you disagree with that, what is the hypothesis that I should think is more probable?
Right.
Like,
he doesn't need to have one.
He doesn't need to have one.
Honestly, this response is baffling to me. I mean, it's going to depend on exactly what you mean by hypothesis, I think. I mean, because you can just think, I don't know exactly what explains or better explains all these data points than theism, but I think that the disjunction of all the non-theist hypotheses is just more probable than theism. You don't need to accept a specific one to think theism isn't more probable than non-theism.
Yeah, you could also say that even when you take the data points into consideration when gauging the probability of theism, you can say that like, and maybe he's gauged the data himself. He might think that the probability is so low such that it doesn't warrant belief in it. And there you go. Like maybe it doesn't surpass a threshold in which belief is like warranted or justified or whatever.
It's like,
and now he doesn't have to offer an alternative like hypothesis that rivals it now.
It's like the thing I said earlier. I don't know what causes autism. I know that vaccines don't cause autism. In order for me to know that vaccines don't cause autism, I don't need to offer another theory of what causes autism and argue that that is more probably the cause than vaccines.
Right. That's right.
Cliffe is trying to do.
Right.
And Alex just saying, I don't know, is going to just be a concession of the debate, because you can't say Christianity is not the most probable hypothesis.
I can't believe he says
if you're going to say that, an entailment of that is going to be that there's some other hypothesis that's going to be more probable. Just
that
name
doesn't
one.
mean that doesn't mean that you know what that hypothesis is.
Yes. All right. Or maybe
you don't don't need to know what it is either. I mean,
yeah, it also doesn't entail that there's an alternative hypothesis that's more probable. It could just be the case that all hypotheses that are available are of equal probability, such that one isn't preferred over the other. Right. That's also an alternative. That's also a possibility. So it does not imply, or you can't infer from that there exists a hypothesis that's more likely than theism. You can't. Nope, that's false. Sorry, bud.
Guys, so everyone who's watching here, you can just think of a theory that you believe in and that you believe is correct. Can you nevertheless pick things out of that, attack that position and say, what about this? Or this doesn't make sense to me. Yeah, that can be true even of a correct position. You can have a completely correct position. In other words, anything, take anything you atheists believe. Let's suppose you're talking about evolution or something like that. Can people attack the theory of evolution and say, this doesn't make sense to me? Or how did you get that? Or how did life arise to be? Yes, they can. Do you still believe that is correct? Yes. In spite of any criticisms, you'd still say, I still believe in it in spite of these criticisms or objections. What does that mean?
What you can also do is you can also critique it and give arguments that it's not the best theory without offering an alternative. For example, you can bring up something like Theodes' critiques to natural selection and think that is a big problem and even a defeater for the theory of natural selection, and you can believe that whilst not having an alternative theory for phenotypic trait distributions. That's something you can do. You don't need to have an alternative hypothesis.
That's actually a great example.
You can be reasonable that means that you acknowledge that you can be reasonable in holding to a position, even if you do not have everything figured out, even if there are big questions, even if there are all sorts of things that people might raise as objections, and you can still believe this is the best explanation going. So you have the claim that Christian theism is the best explanation for the way things are. And Alex is going, well, what about this? And Matthew, what about this? You could grant everything. You could grant and say, okay, I understand you have all kinds of objections. This is still the best explanation. This is the best hypothesis on the table as far as I can tell. And
it's probably not going to agree with that. Like, if by best explanation you mean it perfectly predicts the data, then yeah, maybe. But if by best explanation you're talking about all of the theoretical abductive heuristics when gauging the probabilities of theories, bro is going to deny the fuck out of that.
The claim I'm most concerned with here is that if Alex is agnostic on ultimate origins, he's conceded the debate that theism is not the best explanation of that. That's just, I can't get past that. It's crazy to say.
This is the best explanation. What is your alternative? And he goes, what? I don't have a position. I'm just an agnostic. Okay, that's not a response. So you haven't refuted.
That is a response. What's the alternative? I don't have an alternative.
And that doesn't mean, and again, I'm not saying that Alex successfully refuted biblical theism, but Alex not giving an alternative doesn't mean that he didn't refute biblical theism. That is not what that means.
That's right. You can derive a contradiction in a fucking view and not have a view in placement of that. We just know that that view is false. Maybe the other hypotheses that like explain the origins of the universe, all that stuff, maybe it's out there. We haven't constructed the right propositions together yet. Who knows? But
or
just
or you
because,
can
like, we do an
I mean, yeah. Or you can know that one is very probably not, like you can give some probabilistic argument that something is very likely not the correct explanation without an alternative, you know. I don't know why I have trouble focusing, but I know it's not the 5G waves from the cell phone tower.
All right.
My view that this is the best explanation. You have not said, no, you can't say that's the best because this is better. You haven't said that. You just said, I don't know. Okay, well, fine. Then you haven't given any reason until you put another explanation, which you think is equal to or more probable than Christian theism. Then I could grant every single thing you said. I could say I have no explanation for animal suffering. I have no explanation for this. I have no clue what happened in the Gospel of Matthew. There, I still think this is by far the best explanation out there. You could grant everything he's saying and still not conclude that I think that Alex is right about this.
I think a helpful point to make here is
so you could
not a hypothesis.
You could not give any explanation for animal suffering and accept everything Alex is saying here, including that animal suffering is evidence against theism, and you wouldn't have a problem here. Is that right?
I think he's specifically saying and still think this is the best explanation. That's what I think.
Okay.
That's what he was
well,
saying.
yeah, you can do that, but
I know it's still a little.
It's not doing much.
I don't know. Yeah, still a little tricky there.
You haven't. Well, you just haven't accomplished a lot. I mean,
right. So like when
it's
Cliffe
psychological,
is asking, it has nothing to do with what you think the shape of reality is like. It's a psychological disposition you have towards whether or not you believe some certain sets of propositions. So just saying I'm agnostic to this question is not giving an explanation of the data, right?
He doesn't need to give an explanation of the data. And the question specifically was, what's an alternative hypothesis that's like more reliable or something like that? He could be agnostic on that, right? And just say, I mean, I don't have one. And that answers the question.
But biblical theism is most probably false.
Yeah.
What's okay? Is there like a contradiction there, or what's going on? Like, what's the problem?
At best, all Alex doing here is just making observations about reality without making any inferences at that point about what those data.
Listen, you want to skip this ad? I would too. But what if I told you there's a skip ads for
point support or don't support?
Well, I think to kind of defend Alex a little bit, the way that the prompt or the debate topic was phrased.
These ads are crazy.
I know they're getting wild.
Is does the biblical God exist? So maybe what he's trying to do is just kind of poke holes in it and like cast doubt on it, right? Well, maybe that God doesn't exist, and maybe we should just be agnostic. Like that's, I think, maybe where his mind is going is like, if I can get them to be agnostics with me, then that would mean that we can't affirm that the biblical God exists, and therefore he's going to still, win the debate or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if the debate proposition is the biblical God exists and you like falsify it or like extremely undermine it, I would take that as a W, even though he doesn't provide an alternative theory. Like, okay, hello.
That's probably what he is doing. It's just for me, being really a really big Bayesian, is I just don't see a way out of having to posit another hypothesis if you want to say that the biblical God does not exist.
I mean, you can just say that the hypothesis is
improbable.
Here's the hypothesis: the biblical God doesn't exist.
Or that one too.
There you go. Gave you. Now you can compare them.
That sounds like some shit I would say.
Some other
hypotheses, right?
Mm-hmm. Let's do this. Let's actually turn to some super chats. Those have been piling up, so we'll get through a few of these really quickly. Actually,
go to 12.
Do we care about
the? You guys can respond if you want.
Do we care about the super chats? I don't know if we care about the super chats.
I mean, if your name is like based autistic, absolutely. I'll skip through them.
What is the best quick about answering?
There's off, so I think we'll come in just like 2 hours. Call a short gun.
Oh, because the thing is, they might be saying something that's worth responding to. There's also that too. Like in responding to the super chats, they could be saying something that's like, you know, hey, what they're saying is true, or what they're saying is false, or something. I don't know. What do you guys think?
If they want to say something, I feel like they should bring it up during the review of the debate.
We can we can just scroll through and see what the super chats are, and if there's any that there could be an interesting conversation around. This one doesn't look like something I would care much about.
If humans and animals were not intended to suffer, then when, I guess, why do pain receptors come into play? Why do we have sensory organs built in the system intended to recognize pain?
Do you want to see that one?
Skip it.
I'm kind of bored of looking at these guys' faces.
There's a lot of... Okay, hold on.
Not that there's anything wrong with their faces. I've just been looking at them for a few hours at this point.
Yeah.
All right.
Let's go ahead now and turn back to playing some more clips from the debate. So
I just want the chat direct. That was a lot of yapping. That was like what, 30-40 minutes or something. God damn.
This one, we've actually been going for over 2 hours at this point. So just let me know if either of you guys have to head out. Just let me know. No big deal. What we'll do maybe is just play a little bit more from this clip and then start to wrap things up. So let's go ahead and do that. And if we want to do a part 2, we can do a part 2.
Know what my ultimate motivations are. I don't even.
If you guys want to do a part 2, we could do a part 2.
Have access to my own sort of deepest psychology, so I couldn't tell you why it is that I shave my mustache and regrew a beard. I don't know, but I know that it's not because of a man who I don't even believe claims to be God in the first place, allegedly dying on a cross and leaving some scanty evidence behind him.
I don't think that's fair.
Yeah, that was a
that was rough.
That was a low moment.
What was rough about that?
Yeah, I'm wondering what was so rough there. I'm not seeing it.
What can y'all explain why y'all thought that was like bad or rough, or what's, you know, if any of y'all are watching this, please contact us.
New atheist Alex moment.
Yeah, we need to play it again though. Let's listen to
yeah,
it.
That was almost on the like Sky Daddy level.
Yeah, it kind of was.
Of course I shaved my mustache, and of course I'm growing up.
You could just like assign that sort of thing a very low probability, such that he knows that's not like something worth believing in. Like you wouldn't be justified to believing it. If you're not justified in believing it, you don't have knowledge of it. Like maybe that's like the thought process. Maybe I'm being extremely
can you play it? Let me rehear what Alex said.
I think he might say it again.
Yeah, but that's not because I'm some Sky Daddy.
Have access to my own sort of deepest psychology, so I couldn't tell you why it is that I shave my mustache and regrew a beard. I don't know, but I know that it's not because of a man who I don't even believe claims to be God in the first place, allegedly dying on a cross and leaving some scanty evidence behind him.
I don't think that's fair. You are far too
That was the comment he made.
Okay.
articulate. You are far too deep a thinker to convince me that there's not something that's powerfully motivating you. You're living for something, for someone, for some worldview.
I'm not even sure I understand this question.
Come on, sir. You are not just an accident. You didn't just arrive at where you are now by chance.
Like,
you know that
what is this question like?
This is actually a decent point that Cliffe is making. Like,
are you there, Rockster? Can you pause?
Yeah, I'm here.
I don't understand this. Like, what motivates? What it's like the question's almost presupposing that there's only one thing that's motivating you. Presumably, people when they're doing all sorts of things in their day-to-day life, they're not being motivated by one thing. They're being motivated by all kinds of things. Motivated to go to work because I like to be able work helps me get money. I use the money to buy things that I like. I like buying a lot of things. I have various hobbies that I get a lot of enjoyment out of doing, and having money allows me to pursue those hobbies, etc., etc., etc. There's all kinds of different motivations, that competing motivations. There's just not one thing that motivates people to do things, and I'm not sure what exactly Cliffe is asking when he asks Alex, like, what thing motivates you in your day-to-day life? How he's supposed to answer that in like a sentence or something.
Yeah, like as if there's like some sort of like uniformed like statement you can make that like ties all of that together, everything he does in his day-to-day life. So some of them could just be like separate things altogether. Also, like there's also like the depth and the extent of which he's asking the question, because like do I give this guy like my entire causal history? Like, as to what, like what the fuck? Like, dude, we're gonna be sitting here for a bit if that's okay.
Let's inventory my goals and desires.
Yeah. I was like, do you have a couple centuries? All right, let's go. Like, goddamn, bro.
More reflection on yourself.
It's a very important point, and sadly, it's
very
one
important.
Almost none of the atheists who are watching will.
Would you say?
Oh, it's a very important point. Very, very important.
Yeah.
It's something you have to seriously reflect on. It's like if I were to put it a little differently, Alex, look at what we're doing right now. We're having debates about.
Sorry, just like I have to say this. Like they were like talking about like the whole predator thing, right, and all that stuff. Y'all see this nigga right here? Y'all see how he's staring? Y'all can't tell me he looks more predatory than Alex. Like, come on, bro. Look at bro. If I saw this man in a dark alley, I'm puckering my butthole, dude. And I'm going against the wall. He's not coming near me, dog. He's not coming near me, bro. We squapping. We are squapping. That's all I gotta say. My bad.
You know, about ultimate reality and our ultimate cause and so on. And what's that mean? It means that if we're arguing about what this God would do and whether this makes sense, there are all these things that we're taking for granted about what we are and what our purpose is. And we're taking moral laws for granted. We're taking the reliability of human cognitive faculties seriously when we couldn't if we adopted like a serious naturalistic position. We're taking logical laws seriously. We're taking all these.
I don't know why anybody would accept that.
All these background ideas.
What was the claim? I wasn't listening.
He said, he said, you could rewind it a few seconds. He said something to the effect of that. You're taking moral laws for granted. You're taking the reliability of your cognitive faculties for granted, and you don't have any of those if naturalism is true. I just said I don't see why anybody would accept that.
Yeah, that's a crazy ass like burden he's placing on himself by saying that.
Seriously, and something about our purpose that we are supposed to be getting to the bottom of these kinds of.
Oh, purposehood. That's like a lot that's begged into there. Whew. What's the argument that we have like a purpose? Because like I feel like purposehood implies like some kind of like
if he means some unless he just means purpose and like what is it that you want to do with your life. But I think when he says purpose, he's probably baking in something that is more like
robust than that.
Robust. I'm trying to think of like friendly language to use. Some objective mind independent sense of purpose.
I can
issues. We're supposed to be striving to understand these kinds of things. Where would you get that from on naturalism? Where? What is your purpose on naturalism? To make copies of a molecule. And in order to make
that just sounds like there seems to be like conflation of like something that like organisms tend to do and then like what their purpose is. Like one's like a description and purpose presumably is prescriptive.
Right. I don't know why you would think
topic change, I think.
Like suppose that you are a normative realist. Why would you think that objective purpose is like very unlikely on naturalism? I just don't know why you would think that. I need to see the reasoning for that.
Yeah, that's just very strange. Also, I wouldn't I don't know if he's doing this, so I'm just gonna try to be charitable. But if he's doing this and just like saying that like our purpose like under naturalism would be just to like reproduce or like, you know, send genetic information to our offspring. Like we can point to other like sort of descriptive facts about humans, and then if by this sort of reasoning you would say that's also like our purpose too. Again, that's if you're saying that. So yeah, don't do that if that's what you're doing.
In order to successfully make copies of that molecule, you need to survive and find food. You basically need to survive and reproduce. That's what you need to do. That's what your purpose is. That's not according to me. That's Richard Dawkins said that. You are a machine for propagating DNA.
Richard Dawkins said it. I guess it's true then.
Wait, but like why would that be our purpose? Also, what's like begged into that term? What do we mean?
Stop trying to argue this point, Ruxter. Richard Dawkins said it.
Get wrecked.
Fair. No, fair. Richard Dawkins is atheist God. Okay, I got you.
Revolve around
My
that.
bad.
Why are we having the everything you're doing and saying sounds like we're made for something much more significant than we are on your worldview. In other words, what we're doing.
Also, you know, Than and Cam, if your homie is like saying something wrong, y'all gotta say something. Because like my homies here, if I say something wrong, they'll get on my ass about that.
I think we've done entire live streams criticizing Alex as well. We did a reaction stream criticizing Alex.
Yeah, you know. I was with Danny, right?
Yeah.
LVO.
Yeah.
Right now, Alex fits Christian theism much better than it fits naturalism. And so even when I'm sitting here listening to you give your arguments.
When you say fits better, what do you mean by that?
It's like you're crying out, I'm more than naturalism claims I am. I'm far more. I'm far more. I have purposes. And
bro is agnostic.
Can everybody here today put their hand on the heart and say, I'm more than naturalism says I am?
Hold on, I gotta stand up. I,
under my shirt,
Dexter Lennon, am more than what naturalism is.
No, it's what naturalism says I am.
What naturalism says I am. I got
There
a
you go.
problem. All right. Hallelujah.
I have purposes that are far beyond anything I should have if naturalism is true. And so even when you're telling me to take you seriously, Alex, I can't take your argument seriously because everything that's going on tells me you're wrong.
But also, I think Alex.
So, bro's just saying that, like, look, like, the context in which you're like talking to this person, all of it just says that, like, it just assumes theism is true from the outset. That's what it just feels like he's like saying. I don't know. What were you about to say, Frank?
Nah, it's just
impulse.
Go back a couple seconds. I think didn't he just say that like everything that he encounters or something like that, or that he's saying?
Like what, like 15 seconds? 20?
Yeah, that's fine. No, that's fine.
It's like you're crying out, I'm more than naturalism claims I am. I'm far more. I'm far more. I have purposes, and I have purposes that are far beyond anything I should have if naturalism is true. And so even when you're telling me to take you seriously, Alex, I can't take your argument seriously because everything that's going on tells me you're wrong.
What is it exactly that's going on? Like,
yeah, that's what I'm like.
Like if
everything going on, what?
Presumably, Alex is because he's talking about they're talking about agnosticism.
When he says that, what he means is the fact that the universe exists, the universe is fine-tuned, consciousness is there, there are moral laws, there are logical laws, people have rational faculties, that, you know, all these things that Alex is assuming in the background that just leads you directly and unquestionably to theism.
Right.
And Alex hasn't addressed any of that. So that's why, you know, he can't take Alex seriously.
They just want him to address all of it in the middle of a debate that hasn't been brought up yet. So that's what they want.
But it's also not the case that that's the very thing in question. That's not the case,
that's also
right?
Not, yeah. That's also not the topic of the discussion.
You thought you thought that you were winning this debate on theism? Okay, respond to every argument for theism right now.
You thought you came here to debate biblical God? Nah. What's the argument? What's your purpose in life, Alex?
when we're perusing these apps and trolling, we got to pull that one. Oh, you thought you were winning? Ha!
Answer every objection to your view.
Now refute all of them. Oh, and one fell swipe, mind you.
But also, I think Alex needs to reflect a bit more on why he's doing what he's doing, and this I think is also related to it is related to the problem of evil in a sense. And this I hope this doesn't get too technical, but related to like your values, what you value most in the world. In philosophy, the sort of category that this is in is called axiology. All right, it's a big word, and all it means is value. Okay, and so what he values the most. This is what Cliffe is kind of getting at here.
I think that why as soon as he said that, Than started getting a chub.
Yeah. I think Than, you're I think you're a bad influence on this guy, Than.
Are you doing what you're doing? What is the value that is sort of motivating you to do what you're doing? And I think for probably the vast majority of people, what they value the most, and this could be under the surface, and I think this is why Alex is responding in the way that he is because this is under the surface for him. He values, just like most people, pleasure. He values, and this is also why he objects to the problem of evil, because it
I think
involves
Cliff
the
does
opposite.
too. I think Cliff does too, from giving earlier conversation in the debate.
I'm not sure what the purpose of bringing up axiology is.
But I will say, even if it, like, this whole talk about axiology, like value, again, why is it even being discussed? Even let's say, because Alex is an emotivist. Anyways, so why are we, who cares about Alex's view? The one here, the one that should be defending their view right now is just Cliff and this guy. I don't know, Stuart. Yet we're focusing on Alex for some reason. But hey.
Yeah, it's like, let's stop trying to like either psychoanalyze or trying to like gauge as to what like axiology is in the background for Alex, whatever. Dude, like the internal critique, it goes through or it doesn't, regardless of what the position of the interlocutor is. So worry about that. Stop talking about all this irrelevant shit.
Of pleasure, which is pain. And so he thinks that's bad, pain, bad, pleasure, good. That's ultimately like his sort of view of the world. And I think this all
imagine rendering an argument to someone and then they just start precepts, right? Imagine rendering an argument to someone and they just start like talking about your worldview. I'm like, bro, do you reject the fucking premise or not, dog? What are you doing?
And I don't think that this animal suffering argument needs to assume something like suffering is necessarily always bad. All it needs to say is that suffering is like generally the sort of thing that benevolent beings would prevent.
Right, exactly. And it doesn't seem like that requires like any, all that matters is that like that's something you also agree, the interlocutor agrees with, and then if you disagree with it, then y'all can talk about that.
Also plays into his view of the problem of evil, which also explains why he's living this the life that he is and why he's making the decisions that he's making. And again, this is not a critique of Alex per se. This is more along the lines of just getting people
analyzing Alex.
This is
like,
go ahead.
Yeah, so capturing Christianity is just trying to capture psychologies over here. I don't understand what the whole point of this is. Like, we're just trying to guess what's going on in Alex's psychology. Whatever his motivations is doesn't really matter. He could be the most dishonest piece of shit motherfucker, whoever, whatever. It doesn't matter. Like, the point stands on its own, I think. Call me. Unless he wants to psychologize me too. I mean, he could feel free, but maybe we're all being sophists over here.
Speak for yourself.
Well, everyone watching this to think about what it is.
You said what?
Cameron will probably think otherwise.
Well, only a sophist would think that.
That is motivating you to do what you're doing. And I've had to do this too. I've had to really, really, really reflect on why it is that I behave in the ways that I do, why I take certain actions, why I do certain things. And ultimately what it came down to me was focusing on what do I value most in the world? Is it pleasure or is it something else like virtues? Yeah. And I think people that are drawn to,
I'm telling you right now, like the reason why I value sex is pleasure, dog. It's not no fucking virtue.
The problem of evil are people that are drawn toward pleasure as opposed to people that are drawn toward virtue, and that's what they value the most. And if you do value virtue the most, then actually you're going to start to side with Christians on this. You're going to start to see that actually to get those virtues, to cultivate those virtues, it's going to require some suffering. Like I think it was C.S. Lewis who said that God uses suffering. It's like a megaphone. It wakes you up instead of like just living your life and going about your life, being complacent and being comfortable. Like pain wakes you up and it gets you to really start to think about yourself. I mean, if you have kids, you know that it can be painful. Yeah. Like it can be painful to wake up in the middle of the night. Your baby is teething and they're up the entire night and you're suffering. But what that's doing is it's producing patience. And over time that starts to build and you start to build your character and you start to build these virtues. And so what?
I mean, it just seems like you can just build your agents with these virtues and without the, needing to like build up to said virtues. I'm not sure why one would be more valuable than the other. That seems like that assumes some theory of axiology.
Or maybe, I mean, Alex can just say, yeah, sometimes pain leads to better outcomes. Sometimes pain leads me to good things in my life that I wouldn't have had without the pain. But there's also cases, like, for example, the cases that Alex gave at the beginning of the debate, where it doesn't seem like the pain does lead to anything.
And that's like not to be expected under theism.
You don't need some principle, pain is always bad, pleasure is always good, to run this argument that Alex is running. Most other non-utilitarian ethical theories are going to have like some strong amount of overlap in saying, you know, most of these situations where there's a lot of pleasure are good, most of these situations where there's a lot of pain are bad. They're mostly going to agree on the bulk of those situations, and then they're going to disagree about some cases around the edge.
Yeah. You know, when animals like eat other animals alive, and they're like, while they're still alive, they're eating their entrails and shit. Like, what is that supposed to be in service of? What's the greater good? What's the soul building aspect? What's the virtue that's being established there? I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure.
What is most valuable to you? I feel like I'm kind of preaching, but I think that's what Cliffe is kind of getting at here. You know, he wants him to really think about this, and Alex, I think, does need to think about this more deeply, especially because it does relate to the problem of evil.
I want to build off of that just a little bit here, and I want to say it almost seems
burnout. We all experience it at some point. It's so important to me that I've actually been working on it in therapy. In fact,
my friend Tim Howard.
I also just want to say, like I said in the very beginning, like, stop worrying about things that could, like, that objections that haven't been said in the debate at all, or anything like that. Like, just worry about what the two people were saying and whether or not, like, hey, this like adequately addressed what he said, or his response to this other person was like inadequate or not, or whatever. Like, just because you think there are responses out there to some of the things that Alex is saying doesn't mean he actually didn't do well in the debate. What the fuck are y'all doing? Like, if that was the case, then most debates that me, Impulse, and Amateur will review, like, most of them will be really bad. Like, there'd be like no clear winner in most cases, because like this person didn't bring up like response to his view, and this person didn't bring up like, no, that's like so unreasonable. What are y'all doing?
Howard and I made this observation. It almost seems like a lot of atheists, when they use the problem of evil, they think the most valuable thing that happens, and I might be wrong here, right? But it seems like atheists want to say something like the most valuable thing that happened, that about the reality is what happens to an individual, rather than what that individual does with what happens to them, or what they become after what happens to them.
But the kinds of evils and sufferings that they're specifically using as examples are not that. There are some that like
the deer getting crushed by the in the forest.
Like, that's like, there's nothing. No one is like taking that sort of experience and using that for something else, because that nigga died. That nigga died. Like, what is he using that experience in the future for? Like, it's not like building his virtue or anything. He got murked.
It's building his future in the animal afterlife.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Don't you remember? There's a 7-premise argument. You weren't even paying attention.
As I take it, animal universalism. Yeah.
In the philosophical literature, this is kind of distinguished as the event-centric approach versus the sufferer-centric approach to the problem of evil. And it seems to me the sufferer-centric approach is the right approach, because how that person or agent or animal integrates that suffering into their life is way more important than what actually happens to them.
Yeah, just tell me how the deer integrates that suffering in his life. I'll wait.
Yeah, just tell me how the child who gets like completely, graped by their parent and then is killed by the parent, how that contributes to the overall soul building or overall goodness of the person. Like, that make what? Are you serious?
Well, I don't know. There could be cases like when, like, I know it sounds crazy. Maybe they're more like mentally fortuitous for future bad events or something.
No, I'm
I
saying
don't know.
The child dies.
Oh, it dies.
Yeah, I'm saying like.
Oh,
I
didn't hear that. Never mind. Yeah. No. Yeah. That's yeah. Yeah. You're right.
To them, like, if my son falls off his bike, right? The fall is not the most important thing. The most important thing is the fact that my son retroactively is going to look back at that instance of his falling and go, yeah, my life is on the whole good. Like, I'm not permanently destroyed or maimed. like I'm okay, and my life is good on the whole.
What about the cases where what about the one situations where that's not the case? Well, what then?
Blah blah blah. You get the point. I'm not going to start preaching
I'm learning.
here. And it seems to me like you're just ignoring the sufferer in the instance of that, because like even if you look at the psychological,
just seems like you're just ignoring the situations in which that's not the case.
Literature and the psychology of meaning making or any of this stuff, what you find is that people that go through some horrific suffering find some of the deepest meaning in their life. And it seems like that's a way more important thing.
What about the ones that just
don't? Yeah. Beautiful.
Than whatever actually happened to them. If you get what I'm trying to get at here.
Yeah. David, any more thoughts before we continue?
Nope.
Please, David, don't say anything.
That's to beg the question. That's precisely the kind of thing that we're trying to discuss here. I don't know how many times I can tell you I'm an agnostic. I don't know how we got here. I don't know how the universe began. I don't know if there's a God. What I do know is that the textual evidence for things like the resurrection in the New Testament is simply not enough to convince me. For example,
what is enough to convince you that?
So, like, what I think I was saying was true. It was like he just thinks that the evidence isn't compelling enough, or it doesn't increase the probability such that it warrants belief. I like what I was saying earlier.
Whatever you're living for is true.
I don't know. But for example, the reason I brought up the raising of the dead in Matthew chapter 27 is because this is an argument from silence, but some arguments from silence work. And if you'll allow me to finish this point, you agree that the most extraordinary event in human history was recorded in the Gospel of Matthew. That is, that numerous people rose from the dead, walked around the city of Jerusalem, and were seen by many witnesses. That's what we're told. Interestingly, the text is a little unclear because it says that at the time of Jesus' death, the graves opened, and then they appeared to people after the resurrection, implying that there's this 3-day period where they're either laying around in empty graves or hidden somehow. It seems like a bit of a confused text. Now, again, one hypothesis is that this actually happened, and for some reason they were, I guess, like maybe still dead in their graves for 3 days and then they got up or something, and that this
is still just so confusing as a supposed internal critique.
It's terrible as an internal critique. You could, guys, just to be clear, it is relevant if he wants to understand whether this happened.
Did he even get to the critique yet?
I don't think so, because I remember from watching this debate originally, the point is something along the lines of one of these accounts speak of like some mass resurrection or something. Historical sources dated around the same time period don't talk about that. A sort of like really surprising, really widely observed supernatural event like that is notable, and you would expect if it was true that it happened, you would expect sources around the time. It's like something along those lines, but I don't think Alex finished giving the thing yet.
Whether this actually happened, what is reported in the Gospel of Matthew actually happened, and if so, what is it that exactly that happened? That's a relevant discussion. How that is relevant to a debate about whether the God of the Bible exists is very, very straight. You could throw out the entire Gospel of Matthew. You haven't hurt the argument at all that the God of the Bible exists. So anyway, in other words, whatever you conclude about that passage, whether you think it happened or didn't think it happened, and so on, the God that is described in the Bible, does that God exist? Which is what they're debating.
I think that this is.
I want to say one thing too.
This seems like a pretty fair point. I think that it's probably not super critical or super important that one story mentioned one time in the Gospel of Matthew is like whether or not the biblical God exists is just going to turn on whether or not that story is true.
Yeah, that's true. Because it could be the case that, I mean, unless you want to say that the biblical God existing like sort of necessarily entails all those facts. So if those facts are false, then that sort of like falsifies God or something.
Maybe you want to see that. Maybe you want to say that like if one story in the Bible is false, it's like somewhat more likely that the rest of the claims in the Bible are false. But I mean, there's like two things there. One is if that might be evidence, but it seems like kind of weak evidence, unless the reasons in favor of thinking that story is false also apply to the rest of the claims in the Bible. And two, it seems to only undermine your reasons for thinking that the biblical God exists if the Bible is the only way that you're getting to the biblical God existing. But you might think that you have got there independently. So,
right.
Which is, Alex, I think this is a huge mistake I hear a lot.
It could just be it could just be the case that like whatever essential properties are attributed of this God are still true, but like all these sorts of stories surrounding God could be false and stuff. Yeah.
Alex said something along the lines of like, look, we have this textual data, and I find this not convincing of resurrection.
Yeah.
Look,
you not finding something consistent. I mean, you not finding something convincing is not my criterion of whether I believe
right,
something.
exactly. Alex, you're not the ideal observer. You're not the ideal reasoner. What's important is the textual data that we do have. Is this more expected on the condition Jesus rose from the dead than any of the competing theories? That's what matters. You finding it not convincing isn't really an objection.
All right, I think let's do this. Let's play one more clip. We'll skip forward a little bit in the video. Let me see which one. And this one actually has Stuart talking. So he claims that atheists have a much bigger problem in explaining their moral outrage, which I think is going to kind of summarize a lot of what we've been talking about in the stream. So that's why I'm going to play this.
This is going to be very
commands the Hebrew armies to do.
That's not going to be stupid.
And it's obviously why we know why, because it's for victory in battle. Now God could have
So they're talking about some Old Testament. Yeah, they're
he's talking about the hamstring of the horses here.
Mm-hmm.
I just really want to say this. What Phil is saying, Phil is wanting to imply that this is about taking down the enemy's horses.
Well, explain the passage really quickly for people that didn't watch the debate.
Yeah. So there's I don't remember right off the top of my head, but there's a passage in one of the Old Testament war texts where the Israelites are supposed to hamstring the horses of the enemies, right? Phil wants to say the purpose of this is just for military warfare purposes, but that's not actually what's happening in the text. What's actually happening in the text is a subversive thing to war. In other words, time and time again, what you see in the Old Testament is God actually telling the Israelites to not take certain weapons, not use certain weapons, and not use horses or chariots in their battles. And so the whole point of what is happening here is this is God's way of saying, no, you can't use these because you're not winning these wars through weapons and all these means of these other kings and nations around you, Israel. We're going to win these wars through covenant faith.
What did you say?
It's all biblical stuff. Do you want to skip it or keep watching it?
Sure.
Well, I want to hear Stuart explain why it's crazy for the atheists to feign moral outrage or whatever.
Yeah,
Before Stuart comes back in though with his
reported the horses elsewhere. He could have just put them to sleep for a few hours during the battle, but no, he commanded this torture. Right now, if that doesn't convince you that this God is not perfectly good, what would?
Well, I just continue to rely on my favorite intellects over there where you guys are. And C.S. Lewis would answer, yes, there's a problem emotionally for me when it comes to this issue, but there's a greater problem for the atheist agnostic in explaining this type of moral outrage they have over this issue. So we both have problems. I'm not going to say, oh, this is an easy one. And I'm not going to say let's just turn it into a page turner. No, there's true issues here, but I defer to C.S. Lewis, and I think Alex should as well, when saying that you still have a bigger issue than me in answering this question when it comes down to where is this ultimate moral outrage coming from? It's just your own subjective opinion.
I would like to know.
Why try?
So I actually want to give an analogy that I promised at the beginning of the stream that I think is going to help outline what Stuart is kind of getting at here. So suppose that there's a team on Antarctica that is drilling for ice cores, okay? And in one of these ice cores that happens to be like 50,000 years old or something along those lines, that we find a Rolex watch is frozen in that ice core. What is the explanation? What is the explanation of this watch being in an ice core that is 50,000 years old? One explanation is that it was put there by humans somehow. Okay. That's one explanation. Now that explanation has problems. Why is a human putting a watch in an ice core that is 50,000 years old? Why is a human putting that there? There doesn't seem to be much reason to be putting it there. Maybe another hypothesis would be that someone time traveled and left it there on accident. Okay, there's problems with that because is time travel even possible? Right? That's a problem. There's a problem with that hypothesis. Now compare that to the hypothesis that the watch arose by chance. What's going to be more likely? That a human put it there, which there's problems with that hypothesis, versus that it arose by chance. Still, the human put it there hypothesis is way on a number of magnitudes higher probabilistically than the chance hypothesis, like naturalistic chance. Somehow the elements came together from different parts of the...
Is the analogy that like humans are supposed to be the watch?
Or is the analogy that the moral outrage is supposed to be the watch?
Yeah, like, because then, like, if that's the case, there's going to be like some, I think, some pretty clear symmetry breakers there. So
one thing is like this is a little bit nitpicky, but the thing that Stuart asked him to explain wasn't the moral facts, it was the moral outrage. There's going to be plenty. You just explain that with psychology. That's not hard to do. You just give some psychological explanations. Charitably, what he meant was, what's the explanation for presumably you believing in some moral fact and you're objecting to this practice on the basis that it violates that moral fact. One, I don't think that anybody needs to presuppose mind-independent moral facts in order to have
an outrage
towards that. And two, I don't see any effort whatsoever given to motivate the view that there wouldn't be moral facts, or it would be more unexpected that there's mind-independent moral facts on atheism than theism, or even naturalism than theism. I just don't see that being argued for, motivated at all. It's just taken as a given here.
Yeah, because you could also say that the sort of like response that you have, this sort of outrage that you have towards this event that's transpiring, could be explained through, maybe it's like the theory of evolution or something like that. Maybe like when we express disdain towards something, or we express some sort of like negative attitude towards something, for whatever reason that was like conducive to like our survival and the reproducibility of our species or something. Because when we express disdain towards something, we let other people know, and then with that information they can adjust behaviors accordingly. And there you go, you have something that like maybe even perfectly predicts that sort of data. Skadoosh. All right.
The universe somehow combined into this, thing that looks like a watch, has a Rolex
so the universe
logo on it and stuff, and just happens like.
But Cameron,
so
you said something?
I thought he said the universe was the watch.
I think the analogy is supposed to be like our moral like intuitions, or the moral outrage, or whatever the fuck.
Yeah, that's weird. I felt like I just heard him say that the universe was the watch, but whatever.
Yeah, but there's also a problem with that, because like we know that like watches like come from other people, like that's kind of like background information we already have. We don't know if it's the case that moral
presumably they're supposed to be
moral intuitions that we have like originate from some other intelligence agent or something like that.
Yeah, because presumably they're supposed to be metaphysically necessary. It's not like they're put there. Well, the outrage maybe.
So like that's where the analogy is just going to get broken down.
Does God have moral outrage?
I'm agnostic as to the question of how the.
Would you consider like the floods and stuff like an expression of moral outrage?
Yeah, probably.
Probably.
Watch got there.
You are.
I'm sorry, guys. That's
you're
that's
way
kind
too
of
intelligent.
That remark from Fan right there is if you didn't understand what we were talking about earlier, perfect example. You have a watch. It's in a chunk of ice. It's been there for 50,000 years. It's a Rolex. Any hypothesis you put forward about how a human being put it there, whether it's time travel or inventing some teleportation device that teleported it there, or whatever you want to come up with, there are going to be problems with your hypothesis. You're going to say, does that really make sense? And you can attack whatever hypothesis you come up with. That doesn't change the fact that the hypothesis that a human being put that there is massively, massively, massively more probable, and by far a better explanation than the idea that it just arose by chance and all the parts came together. And so that's kind of what we're dealing with. You're dealing with an atheist saying, oh, but that explanation doesn't make sense.
That's exactly what the atheist explanations are.
Yeah. But we've already explained why this analogy doesn't work.
We know that someone may have invented a teleportation device. It doesn't make sense. Yeah, I can grant that you can raise all kinds of objections. It's still massively more probable than any.
No, because the objections I'm providing actually, it's not clear if like a human putting you know, if we were to switch like the the watch with something that's more analogous to like our moral faculties or whatever is responsible for our moral expressions, and it's not clear that those come from like another agent or something like that.
The alternative you have, unless you can show me a better alternative that doesn't involve a human being. If so, I'm waiting.
Then it's more probable it comes from another agent. That's what I meant to say. Sorry.
Oh, I'm just an agnostic. Okay, but then you're not showing me that there is a better explanation than the explanation that a human being did it. And so you can apply the same reasoning here. What kind of good God would do this or order that? On what basis do you, as an atheist, say that God couldn't command you to do that to every animal on the planet? What basis? The moment
this
you're
is
saying
like level zero memes.
You're now
like, man, if you hear your buddy like yapping about stuff that's like dumb, you got to say something, man.
On what basis does the atheist criticize the morality when in their view everything is just stardust and returns back to stardust in the end?
Oh, goodness.
Now you're in the realm of theism, asking about God's reasons for doing things, rather than saying you have a better explanation, because what you're saying does not fit with your worldview. How would you know what God would have to do? How would you have access? How would you, as whatever it is you believe you are on naturalism, namely a machine for propagating DNA that just became smarter than other machines for propagating DNA, why would you think that you have access to these universal rules that even God would have? So now,
hold on.
Now what you're doing is
this idea,
you're in the realm.
I hear it said a lot, but it's just very weird to me. Why believe that you can have access to the reasons why God might allow something evil to occur? Right? That idea is very weird to me. Because, like, it's not that I don't need to have access to the reasons. You could just give me, like, I don't know, some weird moral sense where, where I'm kind of like, when something that apparently evil happens, I may feel like a sense of comfort because I know that that thing is being used for something good. Right? You don't need to have access to the reasons in order to have that sense of like, I don't know what to call it, like moral, I don't know, indifference, or like moral indifference because it's being used for some goodness that God may have in mind. So it's not that you need to have access necessarily. It's just that you might just be able to have like this moral sense that it's permitted. You know that it's being permitted, and that gives you like a calmness feel, like that feeling of calmness. I don't think that's required to have access to those beliefs that God may have in mind.
I think you're wrong.
Of arguing about what God would do and what God's reasons might be, but you have not shown that you have any sort of better explanation because nothing that you're saying or doing actually makes sense.
Right. The chance hypothesis is not a better explanation than the human hypothesis.
It's a good thing nobody put forward the chance hypothesis.
All right, let's get to some super chats now, and if you guys do have to head out, just let me know. Otherwise, we'll try to keep this to around 15-20 minutes, and then we'll close out the stream. All right, DFW Herbie says Alex's philosophy 101 arguments were excusable when he was a freshman undergrad, but now it's bordering pathetic. Thanks for calling him out. Yeah, some of these arguments, I would like to see some more progress on Alex's part, like at least interact with the stuff that's
maybe
out, right.
Now, hear me out here.
Do that. Even if you disagree, that's fine.
Maybe Alex would get deeper into the arguments, the responses, the rejoinders, the counter rejoinders, and all that stuff. If I don't know, the people who he was debating were actually pressing him on that instead of just like repeating dumb slogans for an hour and a half straight like Cliffe and Stuart were doing. But I don't know, call me crazy. Maybe it's not all Alex's fault that he only stayed at a surface level for these arguments when he was talking to people that gave like joke responses.
That's facts.
Fine. But interact with the stuff that's being said to you in response.
Is this about it? Because it seems like they're just reading super chats now. You guys want to call it here?
Yeah, we can call it. I doubt it'll be interesting for the rest.
Yeah. Cool.
Anything that you guys want to say in closing?
I don't think so, but I'm trying to look. Oh, are you building model planes now?
Yeah, I was working on one. I was trying it out.
I used to do that, but with cars.
Okay, it's kind of a lot of work.
Yeah.
But it's fun.
Anything, Ferdinand?
Damn, you just outed my entire name, huh? That's what you want to do, huh?
It's all right. It's all right. We're Gucci.
How let's read. Let's see if there's anything in the chat. How and why did we arrive at a watchmaker analogy when discussing moral outrage? That's a very good question. I was sort of expecting that watchmaker example to supposed to be an analogy for the challenge and the atheist explaining moral outrage versus the theist, but then they didn't really bridge the gap there and explain what was supposed to be analogous. It was all sort of very puzzling.
It seems like they were assuming that like the sort of moral expressions, it's like quite clear that moral expressions like they're caused by like another agent or something like that. How like watches are, you know, like the location of a watch is like caused by another agent. But it's not quite clear that the analogy actually tracks that.
But yeah, if they Capturing Christianity does a part 2 to this one, then we'll probably do a part 2 to this one. Otherwise,
Yeah, how long have we been doing this live for? Let's see, like
too long.
3 hours and 12 minutes. They did this for about almost 3 hours. So honestly, we didn't do that much bad compared to them. So
No. And the original debate was like 2.5 hours. So
yeah. Yeah, if anyone who agrees or disagrees with any of our sentiments here or anything that we have stated, you guys can come contact us.
Well, yeah. We're also happy to bring people who disagree on to the StreamYard, so we can do another stream and bring people on who want to push back against the critiques, and we can talk to them on here. So
Dubs.
Yeah, just
well, you guys, nice chatting. You guys have a good night.
Yeah, you too. See ya. And